Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Delicious things to eat.
The popcorn can't be beat. The sparkling drinks are just dandy. The chocolate bars and the candy. So let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
I'm a fan of classic movies.
Hello and welcome to Overlapping Dialogue, a podcast of double features dedicated to programming the finest, most eclectic, and downright bizarre film pairings and cataloging the discussions that ensue. We're your gruesome twosome, Kyle and Levi Huffman. I'm Kyle.
And I'm Levi.
And welcome to our 66th episode, dropping on the eve of Christmas Eve, December 23rd, which is a special day for us for a lot of reasons. First and foremost, that's our parents' anniversary. So happy anniversary to Rick and Kim Huffman. Also, as huge Seinfeld fans, it's Festivus for the rest of us. So
it's funny because, you know, I love Seinfeld and think Festivus is funny, but actually thinking about it, I think it's totally evil and awful holiday, actually.
Well, I mean, the thing is, you know, it's been blown up into this whole cultural phenomenon. It's like a later season Seinfeld episode that's kind of a one-off episode anyways. I mean, it's not meant to have any big grand significance.
It's like that episode was also when Kramer went back to work at the bagel shop, because he'd gone on strike for years. And then, the strike is off. And he goes back, like...
Just imagining Cosmo Kramer working a daily job, you know?
Yeah. Well, it shows at the end when he goes back and he accidentally gets bubble gum in the bagel, and the wood shop class guy from Ned's Declassified is the manager, and he's like standing there watching him do it. And
so, you know, holidays are coming up. Holidays are here, indeed. Christmas is right around that corner, right? Just right. It's like right there. You see it? Do you see it? You look close enough?
It's over there.
And so our two subjects today are The Year Without a Santa Claus, of course, the TV special from 1974, and It's a Wonderful Life, of course, Frank Capra's feature from 1946. I know The Year Without a Santa Claus represents a little something new for us. It's a TV special, not technically a theatrically released film.
Short of an hour.
Yeah, just short of an hour. And then certainly we're going to talk a lot about the Rankin-Bass tradition, which in many ways those specials that came out in the 60s and 70s, along with the totally separate, Charlie Brown Christmas, have kind of, for generations now, canonized holiday entertainment, and so many things have aped and taken from them. But then if you want to talk about the all-time thing that's been aped and stolen from, and in of itself is an aping of Christmas Story, or Christmas Carol, excuse me. I sometimes get those two confused.
Which is hilarious because one is literally probably the greatest Christmas movie of all time, pretty easily. The best movie ever to be about or have to do with Christmas. And then the other is so
Red Ryder BB gun,
overrated and shown all over the place.
Both take place in the 40s. That's interesting.
Yeah, well, it's funny because there were some kids at school the other day that were like, "Oh, can we watch that?" And I just kind of looked at them and was like, "No." And they were like, "Why?" I was like, "Because it's going to be on 24 hours a day. Go watch it there, witch."
Yeah.
Like, you know, I'm just like, I'm not dealing with that crap. Like, and you know what frustrates me about that movie too is how it is a genuinely clever screenplay. I think is really well written movie and is really fun. It is genuinely pretty funny. But I don't know, it just loses its luster after a while.
Which anything would.
Yeah,
anything
would
if
and
played
I
that many
think
times.
that when I was a kid, I loved it. I thought it was very ingenious, even at that age. And even now, I think it's even more witty and interesting as I've gotten older.
Adult, because the movie tricks you into kind of thinking it's told from a kid's perspective, but it's from an older person looking back on their childhood. You know,
But also it's just the way people react to things is the problem ultimately, because it's like, no, that movie is pretty disingenuous about what Christmas is actually about. And I mean, is it a reality? Sure, but I don't know.
We've still yet to see a Christmas Story, or was that the name of it?
A Christmas Story, Christmas.
Yeah, that's
like,
right. Yeah.
What? Like that's I'm not even kidding. That's literally one of the worst things I've ever heard. But one of the best things I have ever heard is in A Christmas Story. My favorite line, and it's what my coworker and I were quoting each other all week, is, "You used up all the glue on purpose." Is just genuinely hilarious.
Enough of that crap.
Anyway,
It's a Wonderful Life, a genuinely great, truly great movie. And I think, one of the few Christmas movies that is, again, a truly great film. I mean, with a capital G. Of course, from two of classic Hollywood's premier craftsmen and artisans, of course, in Frank Capra and Jimmy Stewart.
So genuine, so modern, and still so affecting. I mean, it truly is. And I'd liked it the first time I saw it, but seeing it again this time, it really blew me away, in particular, just how great it is. And for a movie to be over 2 hours long, too, I think it's very effective in that way. And it feels like an epic, even though it's not really. Yeah. I mean... but that's just by nature of its structure. But,
and we'll get into this later, but by nature of its message as well, the epic nature of everyday life, which I feel like is the ultimate theme, and that, you can have a truly great life in the most humblest of ways and circumstances, which undercuts sometimes your own expectations of what you want your life to be. Nonetheless, we have to get through a Blue Plate special of several items this week. A lot of big new releases we've seen, so we'll get right into that. Put that, take that napkin, tuck it under your shirt there, make sure you got it all nice and cozy, because we just gotta dig into that Blue Plate special.
Hi, Audrey. Norma, can I have a cup of coffee, please? Sure.
I'll have what she's having.
Hey, who wanted a large pepperoni? Coming up!
Rain here, back on
Blue Plate special holiday edition.
But also, no. The French no.
Yeah. So, I was remarking this, I think, just yesterday. This coming up, or what we're dealing with now, and some other releases that are around the corner, this is probably one of the richest holiday seasons we've had in a while for movies, in terms of some new movies. And it's not even like half a dozen, but like really 3 that we're focused on, and 2 in particular we're getting ready to talk about, with the Fabelmans and Avatar: The Way of Water. We'll start with the Fabelmans. We saw this, I don't know, about a week ago now, a week plus now.
A week ago. Yeah. Of when we're recording this. Anyway.
Yeah, and so...
It'll be 2 weeks from when you're listening to this.
We've had some time to digest it. This is, of course, the latest film from Steven Spielberg. That in of itself is an event, as always. And it's one of those things that we're one day going to be like, looking back on, wow, there was a new Steven Spielberg movie every year, and we kind of took that for granted. And there's certainly ones here or there we may have missed or whatnot. But
yeah, I've missed most of these newer ones here and there. I didn't see West Side Story. I didn't see Ready Player One.
You can skip that one.
Well, yeah, but I mean, and part of the reason is because I hadn't seen the original West Side Story, so that was kind of why I didn't go see that. But anyway,
there's a lot of places to start with this. I think for one thing, and this reflects a larger aspect of Spielberg's career, is that in the last, since about 20 years nearly now, really ever since Munich, in a serious way, which also represented his very first collaboration with Tony Kushner, which has, of course, been a very fruitful addition to his stable of talents that he's worked with over the last 20-odd years, has been a lot more interested in making historical dramas, and dramas in particular, a lot. And, I think Lincoln represented still among Spielberg's greatest films. I think it ranks alongside E.T. and Jurassic Park or Jaws or Close Encounters, any of those classics he's made. And it's been exciting to see over the last so many years Spielberg himself mature, and he's been maturing. I mean, ever since the '80s with making a movie like The Color Purple, while not exactly in his top echelon of movies, was certainly a development for him, or even also Empire of the Sun, in terms of going in a more historical drama direction. And I think it's very telling that most of his best movies of the last 20 years have been that. And anytime he's kind of dipped back into, I'll do The Adventures of Tintin, or I'll do the BFG, or I'll do Ready Player One, back into that, like, what we expect Spielberg to be, has been a little bit less satisfying. And so The Fabelmans comes as yet another addition to that. This one is most explicitly a kind of a semi-autobiographical or memoiric take on his early life, which already has been so well known, so mythologized, so a part of a lot of his other films already. So, you know, a lot of things to chew on here, Levi, but for you, where does this rank in terms of Spielberg's own filmography, and also just to finally see that biography that's been picked and chose from over the years be given the biggest treatment yet from him directly?
Well, for me, it's his 7th best movie, I think. I mean, after only Jaws, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Jurassic Park, E.T., and Schindler's List, and I think it's just a little bit above Lincoln. I mean, I thought it was just totally amazing. Everything about it was great, particularly before I even get into all the emotional aspects of the movie, which I think are some of his most potent, which is saying something for somebody who's made E.T. or Close Encounters or other films, obviously, he's made. It's just the filmmaking itself. I mean, there were some transitions in this that were truly great. Stuff that just, on a technical level, can only come from someone who's been doing that job for that long. And that's especially impressive when you're able to see somebody do that with their own life. You know, it's a transition within their own life and their thoughts on that and their reflections of that. But as far as it being about his own life, like, that's what I kind of lightly feared going into the movie, was that, it's just going to be the same thing we've heard, you know, as we've all heard about this. It's kind of, you know, such a big part of his filmography, as we've said. We have other, you know, people who've made divorce movies the last so many years. I mean, Noah Baumbach's done that his whole career. You know, but I feel that this was a truly unique one in the sense that, and also is a movie about cinema. And I talked about this in my reviews for the movie, about how movies like 8½, or Irma Vep, are, you know, all about the chaos of cinema and just like the danger of both auteurism and collectivist production, I think, in both ways. And then you have something like Barton Fink, which is, or, you know, kind of saying, all of this is this big sham. It doesn't actually reflect anything, and
it takes
true
genuine
realities,
things and warps and doesn't really.
Yeah, or you have Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which is about, movies are just a vibe, and you need to just live in that, and they don't really mean anything actually. And it's all just about the experience of it or whatever. But this was something that, and I mean, we've seen a lot of movies before this that have shown film as an escape or of some sort. I mean, The Long Day Closes is a version of that, a movie I'm not really a fan of very much. I know a lot of people really love. Or I haven't ever seen it, but Cinema Paradiso, or even this Empire of Light movie that's supposed to be coming out, I know Sam Mendes movie. This was kind of seeing it more as literally, I mean, because it wasn't, you know, we saw as it went on versions of like productions, like the Little War movie he made.
Yeah. Which I've seen some clips of in the past and look very almost identical and similar to what he did at that age. Yeah.
But as far as most of the movie, though, is about him filming his own family and home movies and that sort of thing, because that's the emotional crux of the movie lies upon those, you know, revelations that are discovered as a result of that. But I just felt that it was just a totally new approach in that way for a filmmaker to be making a movie about films and also about their own life could just all fall apart very quickly and be very trite and obvious. But I felt that this was very complex in the sense of that for him, movies began as a way to purge this fear over what he had seen of, like, you know, this train crashing in the greatest show on earth, which, By the way, I always think it's hilarious because I've known that for many, many years that was kind of the movie that made him fall in love with movies and that whole experience because it was his first movie. But just knowing what The Greatest Show on Earth is already, just looking at it of, a movie in the 50s, that kind of movie, I always have rolled my eyes at that whole notion of like, really, that's the movie that got
But then, a movie like that ends up inspiring a talent as otherworldly as Spielberg, so
yeah, and also if it takes John Ford to do that, I suppose whatever. But that's kind of facetious about my thoughts on John Ford, but who is a great filmmaker. But okay, we all know that. Get over it. And I have some kind of thoughts on that whole section of the movie too. I'll talk about later. That I'm kind of just like okay, but all that is just being said is that it starts as one thing and then becomes another, and I think it's all about, it's strange, it's a coming-of-age movie in general, but it's also a coming-of-age movie or a maturation on the effect of cinema that people recognize as they get older, that at first it's this flashy, interesting catharsis, and then eventually it's supposed to actually reflect realities in some form. Now, of course, that the other movie that we're going to talk about later does that in these thematic ways, but is just totally, fantasy outside of that, and that's what other great movies can do. But at least for myself and what I think ultimately that someone like Spielberg did in making the great blockbusters he did, like E.T., was to merge the two together and say this is going to be this big science fiction kind of action-ish movie, but also be about true human emotions and
not only I think to say that his his blockbuster filmmaking, if we're talking about most especially say like Jaws, Close Encounters, E.T., Raiders of the Lost Ark, that golden period he was in, to say that they didn't have some emotional or thematic resonance would be selling them short. However, it is undeniable that his whole career has been about that arc of coming to terms with himself, and again, and also aging with the art form as he got older.
Right.
And I think is a very awesome to see, because there's certain other filmmakers who have yet to kind of age with that sense of maturity in the way that he has. One of the most heartbreaking sequences of the movie is when he's rewatching the home movies and sees his own mother kind of falling, played masterfully by Michelle Williams, falling in love with Seth Rogen's character,
who gave a really good performance, by the way. I want to say, which is something I never wanted to admit, but is true. I think. But in the last few years, he's kind of improved. Slightly
I've never been a Seth Rogen fan, and he is quite good, I think, in Knocked Up, the Judd Apatow movie. And he's almost perfect to kind of like, for us specifically, like, I'm Seth Rogen. God, I hate him. I hate that he's broke up this family.
Right. Yeah.
But the scene where he gives him the camera is a very emotional scene. But that scene where Spielberg's analog, Sammy Fabelman, Sammy was his name, I think, Sammy Fabelman, is playing back he's editing that Michelle Williams' mother had just passed away, and his dad, played by Paul Dano, also masterful, is wanting him to edit together that camping trip that they took together, and that's when he really realizes and understands his parents' or his mother's infidelity to his father. I don't know if that moment literally happened. You know what I mean? I don't know if that literally happened, but you feel Spielberg kind of like that moment, and then if you remember later when the big kind of sit down, we're getting divorced scene is happening, where he looks in the mirror and like sees himself filming the whole thing, is almost him like, both of those scenes together and then a lot of other things in the movie are really him kind of almost angry at cinema in some ways, angry that cinema is like, that this thing he deeply loves is giving way to this sense of vision to see the truth. Yeah. And that through this seeing the truth, he's actually revealing dark, nasty, ugly things about his own life. And it's almost like it's
like what Godard said is that cinema is truth 24 frames per second or whatever.
Yeah, and
or
then
24 times a second.
And this movie in particular is really like a 4 to 5 level dimension of chess, because there's like that scene where you have Sammy looking in the mirror, reflecting on himself, filming it, is almost Spielberg reflecting on himself making the movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's like this
and
like
also
hall
that
of
he
mirrors.
feels this weird like guilt and shame that he has turned this into a spectacle for himself, and that he had done that his whole career.
And then later on, when there's the whole sequence where he had filmed the 1964 Skip Day sequence. When
it was Ditch Day then.
Ditch Day, as they called it. Which, by the way, before I go to the next part, that was one of the most beautifully wrought set pieces I've seen in a movie in some time. Just literal time travel happening. I felt like, oh my God, I wish I could have been here for this moment, especially as a 60s nerd, just seeing the aesthetics of everything.
Yeah.
But the scene where the bully is almost confronting him about how good he made him feel. I won't even go into all this, but I saw this really thoughtful thread on Twitter of that being in many ways about Jews in Hollywood and their depictions of this Gentile, non-Jewish identity of masculinity that was almost a reflection of Hollywood since the very beginning, of how Hollywood was, has a lot of very prominent Jewish business leaders at the helm who almost wanted to hide their Jewishness and highlight what the American ideal as they saw itself was, and that was its own commentary on that, which I thought was very perceptive, and I didn't quite put my finger on that, but I totally recognize that. But the almost anger that the guy feels of him presenting him that way, and then there's a little throwaway line, and this movie has some meta moments to it also, of, well, what about when I make the movie one day? And literally we're watching that. And so that in of itself too is almost Spielberg giggling and thinking about, like, we all know who this Sammy Fabelman analog will become, because here we are all these decades of his rich filmography watching this kind of final act of it, of sorts, of him looking back on his life and career. And so, and again, it's a credit to him. He's also working with one of the great writers of his era, and Tony Kushner, and their collaborations have been just so spot on. Anyways, I mean, I was a huge fan also last year of West Side Story, and how they recontextualized the movie musical in a little bit more of a modern context while also being classical. Very hard thing to do, and I think Kushner's words, most especially, breathe a life into this movie that the visuals do a great job of. The acting certainly does, but that kind of takes it to another level in many ways. And also, we talk a little bit about the scene with what's the guy from the name from Taxi? He's in Independence Day.
Oh, Judd Hirsch.
Judd Hirsch is this uncle who kind of comes from nowhere and it throws this huge wrench into Sammy's own perception of his own life and his perception to his family, and that I know deep down you love this more than you love your family, and that kind of being this,
and that's supported again by later on when he is filming that. Because when I look at that, and I think you're right about what you had said about that moment, but I look at that more and see this kind of sickness of the mind that happens with the creatives, is that I'm going to exploit this pain for my own art, or that almost becomes subordinated to the art because he said, that it'll tear you in two or whatever, and that,
and then he literally gets in the car and gives him a weird look and leaves. And just...
I told you what I would do kind of attitude, but so that's all very new to me, I think, because, there's been a lot of movies about movies, and it's usually always about movies, the chaos, the lies, and it's like, this is far more complex of, the truth, actually.
Well, it's also personal.
It's the personal feeling of that.
Somebody's own life as reflected through movies. Yeah.
Because it's always shown through this very intellectual bent.
Well, it's also usually seen in a larger industrial
and this is totally different than that. And that's what I appreciated about this, is that it did stop with his meeting with John Ford, that it was no, he is beginning in the industry. A lot of people would feel like that's kind of a what kind of ending, but obviously the emotional undercurrent of the movie has reached its ending by that point too. And so but Do we want to talk a little bit about the John Ford
Yeah, so
section?
of course
Because
he's...
I'm not actually as negative on it as I sound, but I do have some
played
thoughts
by,
about
of course,
it,
legendary friend of the pod, David Lynch, who we love and adore and have talked about on many occasions.
like record scratch.
This
entrance.
was known for a while. This was going to happen, and,
Yeah.
and kind of film Twitter erupted in wonder at this casting because it
Yeah.
immediately made too much sense because not like John Ford's movies alongside David Lynch's movies, which are very strange, but his physical
And I know
resemblance
he's a big John
to Ford
fan, and so
his physical resemblance to Ford, and also again that there's a meta nature to this too about him being an elder statesman now of film, not certainly of Hollywood in the sense.
Well, him and
but
Spielberg are in the same, about the same age, I reckon.
Yeah,
something like that.
I saw a bit of an actors on actors discussion with Laura Dern and Michelle Williams, which I need to watch all of because I love both of them. But Laura Dern was the go-between that made all this possible because, of course, Laura Dern famously was in Jurassic Park.
I heard that on Twitter. There was a conversation between Spielberg and it was between Spielberg and Martin Scorsese about, I'm getting it mixed up of whether it was him talking to PTA or
Laura Dern fostered this meeting between them, and that initially he was kind of didn't want to do it, but then he kind of said, basically one condition: I get to wear the costume and I get to live in it for all this time. And Spielberg was like, okay, sure, whatever.
Yeah.
And that they were actually both born, and today of all days, the day we're recording this is actually Spielberg's birthday, 76th birthday, on December 18th when we're recording this, but. They were both born in 1946 specifically. So, and also, and I won't go too much into Lynch's biography, he also moved around a decent amount as a kid and also was greatly inspired by Western landscapes, even though, of course, I feel like his career has reflected a lot less of that than, although the Pacific Northwest, of course, has played a huge role.
That is more of that.
But that...
well, there are parts of... it's mostly in the South, but there are parts of Wild at Heart that I think reflect that.
Yeah.
And Straight Story.
Yeah, but in general, like they kind of have a similar biography of sorts. They have similar aspects to their careers. Of course, Spielberg has been the most commercially successful director in the history of movies. David Lynch a little less so, but obviously has been very successful in the avenue that he has pursued.
As an art house filmmaker, yes,
I mean,
definitely.
And they're both titans of their own respective fields of film, and so it was interesting to see him portrayed in this, and what's even added another layer to this, that this whole anecdote has been told multiple times over the years by Spielberg, and that his own impression of Ford, a lot of people have pointed, sounds similar to David Lynch anyways, and so it made all the sense to have him be that. What was it like for you to see David Lynch portray John Ford in a Steven Spielberg movie?
Well, and I'll start with I mean, okay, so to me, and by the way, I don't want to sound like Quentin Tarantino when I'm like, everyone loves Kubrick, everyone loves Wells.
Yeah.
But Jesus Christ, or whatever, But I've just never been the biggest John Ford fan in general. I mean, I think his movies are incredibly well made. He's been an influence to so many directors that great.
Is one of those names that define what the Western specifically was. Now we've moved past that,
and he's made some great movies. I mean, truly, but to me, I don't know. That's just not my. It's not my cup of tea, as Spike Lee would say.
Yeah.
But other than that, just taking my own personal kind of disinterest in Ford out of this, it felt very loud and obvious and very film Twittery. It felt very much like, oh man, David Lynch is playing John Ford in a Spielberg movie. Like, that's what it felt like when it was happening, because that's what it was. But I don't know, it just didn't feel. It felt very unsubtle in a way that I thought the movie was not, for the most part. Now, this is not as dumb of an ending, even close to what the ending of The Post was, which was like genuinely probably one of the worst endings to a pretty good movie I've ever seen. Just totally awful, genuinely.
I didn't hate it like you did, but it's
bad. I mean,
it's not good. Yeah.
No, I mean, I kind of love it. It's so dumb. I think
his Sights was trying to defend it on film Twitter one time, and he said something along the lines of like, it's almost like Spielberg was geeking out that he got to make a prequel to All the President's Men or something like that. And it's just like, I actually like the post. I've been wanting to rewatch it for a while. I most especially love Bruce Greenwood as Robert McNamara, and the scenes between him and Meryl Streep I really love. But that I don't care for that.
But anyway,
Spielberg has been accused of dropping the ball with some of his endings. Lincoln is a movie that I love so deeply, kind of fumbles at the 11th hour, but I'm like, I don't care. This whole movie is so great. I'm just going to look past that. And
that moment where he looks after him and he's walking down the hall.
And then it does the whole, you think you're going to see his assassination, and that it should have ended there though, earlier. With him walking down the hall.
Or I even liked the part of him at the end with his, second inauguration speech. I'm fine with that. But that whole ending's very complicated. But anyway, I don't know. The whole ending felt very. And I did add something that was very obvious that I did actually like about it was the very end with the camera tilt, which a lot of people have been talking about. I thought was pretty clever. I thought that was interesting. And I love Ford's whole answering monologue. I think that's a great way, and obviously that means a lot to Spielberg. I get it. It's a vanity thing for him to put that in the movie of like, I got to meet Ford, but not only that, but also that he gave him this advice that he's ultimately always lived by. But I don't know, it just felt very strange, but not exactly in like a good way. I don't know. It just kind of stuck out to me.
One thing this movie, I've heard Spielberg tell this story a few times. One thing that really stuck out to me about it in context of seeing this movie and then actually thinking about it with Spielberg's life is that Spielberg was raised by Western landscapes, of course, as we see that he's this, he was born in Cincinnati, spent some time in New Jersey, went out to Arizona and then California. And so especially those Arizona, California years were very influential and imprinted on his life. I think it meant a lot to him to be in the room of the Western director and pass the test, so to speak, and like what that means to him and the self-confidence that gave to him very early in his life that went to propel him to the career that he had.
Yeah, and I mean, I think
I had known that story, but I had not put it in that exact context before. So with all that stuff of him as this Jew living in the West, and we could talk a little bit about the Jewishness of the movie too, because I think that's interesting. I think one of the most interesting depictions of anti-Semitism I've seen in a while is, of course, you have the very obvious anti-Semitism he feels from the boys as the bullies in the movie.
Yeah.
But I think a very interesting depiction of anti-Semitism was of his first girlfriend as depicted in the movie. That she was like, you think also going to rag him for being Jewish, and kind of did, but then was like, but you're cute though. I think I'll try to convert you to Jesus, and those whole scenes of her shrine.
That was another section of the movie I felt was a little bit too ridiculous, but ultimately I accepted that, I guess. But I was like, okay, it's kind of...
But I just thought that was a very interesting depiction of anti-Semitism. It's like, it's not always this hateful bullying thing, that it can take another form.
Right.
And obviously, he's told many stories about anti-Semitism he's faced early on in his life, especially living in some of these environments, I can imagine. But I want to end, unless there's anything else you want to add, with a discussion of Paul Dano and Michelle Williams as the parents in this. I didn't discuss this with you, but I don't think you would disagree with this. I think we should induct both of them as the next versions of our Immune, because both of them separately as their own careers, and then also as they embody the parents in this movie, are spectacular. I mean, I think I joked about this with a group chat that we're in, that this is what happens when you literally get kind of basically the two best actors in their respective fields to play your parents, basically.
Yeah.
And Paul Dano's already had a great year playing the Riddler also earlier in the year with the Batman. A very atypical version of the Riddler as well that I really loved. Michelle Williams has been doing awesome work for a great many years now, and so has Paul Dano. But I really love, the whole dichotomy, and this has been talked about a lot by Spielberg himself, of the free-spirited nature of his mother mixed with the kind of pragmatism of his father. And again, I just thought they were both spectacular as his parents in this. What were your takeaways from kind of seeing them in this movie?
Yeah, I mean, they both, I think, acted at their individual talents. It was a little bit different for Williams, though, because she's obviously very usually much more reserved. I mean, just to list off some of her credits, obviously, her in a lot of Kelly Reichardt's films.
Of course, in Blue Valentine.
And even I haven't seen Brokeback Mountain, but I assume it's kind of similar thing. Synecdoche, New York, also. That a lot of these movies, she plays this very
a little more reserved.
A lot more reserved. And here she was a lot
fraught,
right, but here she was a lot more expressive. Similarly, Paul Dano was a little less expressive, I thought, than normal, because in most of his movies, like
There Will Be
Blood, particularly, or even as the Riddler in the Batman, or Prisoners, or just everything about Swiss Army Man, I guess. That a lot of these performances are very obviously big and expressive. And here it was in these minor ways, but he played more of, I think, and that whole character is very fascinating, and that whole marriage is very fascinating in real life too. But that he clearly is angry about a lot of things happening in his life, but takes it with but he's not exactly like somebody like Mark Ruffalo in Dark Waters, who literally, there's like a scene in the Todd Haynes film, where he literally just sits and allows oh gosh, what's her name?
I'll look it up here.
Anne Hathaway, to literally just like scream at him and be mad, and he just literally sits there and doesn't say anything. It's not exactly that where he's like totally docile, but at the same time, he's a lot more reserved and thankful about the things about his life, and ultimately allows these things to happen that he feels are better for the family. And so that's a really great against type performances from both that aren't against type in the fact that they are great, obviously, because like I said, they are two of our greats. And the fact that I feel like the only fact we haven't inducted them already is because they haven't been on
some of the movies we've talked about. So again, Michelle Williams and Paul Dano, congratulations. You are the latest members of Overlapping Dialogues Hall of Fame, The Immune.
It is better to be the right hand of the devil than in his path. As long as I serve him, I am immune.
Get to hear Benny there again.
Yeah. I would say the only note, but well, whatever, I would throw towards Michelle Williams is that she was in the most recent Venom movies, but she never literally takes paycheck performances. And those were literally the only two I can think of. And she has done so much amazing work. You know what?
And she was even this year also in that Showing Up, that new Reichardt movie, which I haven't seen yet. But
and
I want to say, I guess, before we move on, that those little minor things I said about the John Ford stuff, the Christian girlfriend stuff, are ultimately so secondary because the movie is just so great in every other way that it truly is one of his best movies, I think, and lived up to its pedigree of what it could be, and also what it could have been in another way. It was better that it was more than that, because it could easily have been, in any other hands, would have been worse, I think.
There's also just another thing we haven't mentioned him. Special shout out to Janusz Kaminski, who's been shooting his movies for some time now. The movie looked amazing too. I mean, the lighting has always been key to Kaminski's photography, but especially I really, those images of Spielberg kind of sitting in his closet and the light of him watching on the moviola basically what he's seeing was just very some of those images that are going to last me for some time, I know. Especially combined with the thematics of what was going on. Another movie that is very visually expressive. We saw this just yesterday. Avatar: The Way of Water, which is, of course, the second Avatar film. And I feel like every time I look into this series, the number changes in terms of how many are going to be made. Five or six. Vaguely, I don't know. The first one was, of course, literally the highest-grossing movie of all time. Came out in 2009. Now we're 13 years removed from it, which is further than the distance between Avatar and Titanic when that came out.
That was 12 years.
12 years, and so now we're 13 years removed. I do not think we're going to be waiting quite as long for Avatar 3. I think what's been, quote, shot of that movie's already been, quote, shot. I'm going to keep saying that if I have to, because that's going to come out relatively soon, I think, in the next so many years. We've talked about James Cameron before when we did our Titanic podcast. That's a movie we, of course, think a lot of. Let's maybe also, before we get into this new one, reflect on, we recently rewatched the first Avatar. It's a movie that we both liked. Certainly the visuals in it are, pretty extraordinary. And it's one of those movies that the effects are, again, 13 years old by this point, but still really holds up. What were your thoughts going back and rewatching the original Avatar in preparation for the newest one?
Well, that was a movie that I had seen back probably about 2010, I reckon. Somewhere around there was when I'd first seen that. I didn't see it in theaters, the original. I don't really know why that didn't happen. And I didn't see it again until earlier this year. I watched it actually at school when we were watching movies during lunch with my students. And I have found randomly among the average populace, and I don't say any of all of what I'm about to say is not at all a negative comment on average moviegoers, but I find this fascinating that movie and presumably this one are massive with average moviegoers and people who watch average blockbusters. It's actually quite interesting, especially for the South. That's weird. A lot of the people I go talk to about this, they've either seen it and love it, or they're like, oh yeah, that's, I want to see the original one, or oh, I saw that a long time ago and liked it, or oh yeah, because I remember when I showed it, a lot of kids were like, oh yeah, we're watching this, and we're like real into it. And then literally everyone that I've talked to and I've said, oh, I went and saw that. Literally over the last 24 hours, everyone I've talked to has been like, oh man, I really want to see that. Got to see that. Oh man, like a couple of weeks ago, I was talking to a student I don't have but know really well, and he was like, oh yeah, my family and I are going to go see that soon. Like they had already planned that out ahead of time. Like, I mean, it's a big deal, and it's interesting because for a movie that has had, that came out, was massive when it first came out, pretty much has retreated from the public view for the most part, especially in cinephilia, which it was a major backlash against it originally, I feel like, by cinephiles, has kind of become beloved as a response since then, but ultimately I don't think deserves either reaction. The first movie, I feel, is very average, very down the middle, blockbuster movie, very impressive in its, structure, its themes, its world building, its action and special effects, but as an actual narrative and story and acting is not very great, and is one of his lesser works by far for Cameron. This, I'm very thankful to say, lived up to whatever hype there could possibly be for it, and was a better movie for a lot of different reasons, I think, of what we're going to talk about, and made me realize what I wanted to love about the first one that I was mostly able to with this one, I guess.
Do you think part of the necessary function of that first one was to kind of ingratiate us into this world, and this is true of a lot of like franchise stories or movies or long form stories, is that you kind of got to have that like thing that introduces you to it, like dumps Jake Sully into this body of the Avatar and him being acquainted with it and get us through that. Then we can have this version of this movie where it's like, okay, now we're in the world. Now we can explore the world more. Now we can see that all Na'vi are not the same thing, that there are variations of Na'vi and different cultures of Na'vi, mixed with the whole like interesting nature of the, what do they call it, recombatants?
The recombinants.
The recombinants.
Which they don't ever actually say out loud in the movie, do they? Once or twice,
well,
maybe
it might
at the
have been
beginning.
early on where Stephen Lang's talking to the Avatar Stephen Lang, which is a very strange thing. That he's back. He, of course, died very clearly in the last movie, but of course,
that face,
but of course was cloned and put into a body of another Avatar of a Na'vi.
Yeah.
And that most of this movie is like this revenge story of him trying to get revenge against Jake Sully and chasing Jake and Natiri's new family that they've had.
Which is strange that it's such a much smaller scale, battle between individuals. But yet, the action set pieces are so much bigger. It's very strange, I think. I mean, not technically, I guess.
Yeah,
the whole tree battle in the first movie is objectively bigger, I think, of what it's intended to be. But the action in this was just so transcendent, and the visuals. But yeah, and that's what I think was one of the first things about the movie that I appreciated more, was that it was a far more personal story about, I want to get revenge on these people. And the humans returning in general to Pandora was almost seen as an afterthought. Like, oh yeah, they're back and they're doing stuff. And Edie Falco's the general now, by the way, who also drinks coffee when she goes on bombing runs, whatever. Yeah. And that's all kind of like, oh yeah, you worry about that in the third one. We'll deal with that later. Yeah. But right now, we've got Stephen Lang back as the recombinant or whatever.
And this movie is just in general a lot more about family. Unexpectedly, a little bit more from the Stephen Lang's character's angle.
Back on family.
But with looking at, Jake,
and she, of course, not coming back after her death. Because she did turn her back on family, as it turns out. But anyway,
turn her back on life, I think. In the last one, right?
Screw this, as she said.
Yeah. But that obviously, and one of the more mysterious aspects of all this is the Sigourney Weaver relation to
Which
this.
Actually worked a little better than I was expecting it.
Yeah. So Sigourney Weaver plays basically a daughter of Sigourney Weaver. Right, yes. Like that she gave birth when she was in her coma or something. Was that what it was? Or like
I think it's okay. Pregnant? So when they tried to, this is where it gets confusing.
Revive her.
So when they tried in the first movie when she was shot, and they did the same thing they do at the end of Jake Sully, where they're trying to take her consciousness and go ahead and fix it permanently over to the Avatar body, and basically kill the human body, but you're still going to have the same consciousness of the person.
Which was a test run for what eventually happens to Jake.
Which does work, definitively for him. My understanding was always that the Avatar just died of hers. But supposedly it's in this coma and in like almost not like a cryogenic state, but in like a fish tank, basically, and it's just laying there asleep or whatever. But that...
then they were able to transfer that into
now supposedly she was pregnant. That Avatar was pregnant. Right. I feel like it's trying to do this whole like Mary and Jesus thing here is what they're trying to do, because then all the implications of this Sigourney Weaver child, who Sigourney Weaver plays as a teenage version of an Avatar body of her.
Yeah, right.
That it's trying to imply that she is in contact with Awa, the like spiritual god that of Pandora that connects all of the habitat and the wildlife and the Na'vi together in like a spiritual connection, that she is able to like communicate or see visions of Awa herself, and she's like the only one who can do that, and that's kind of how she's able to help in the climax do a couple things to save some lives or whatever. But so I think that and I found all that interesting to the point where I didn't mind that whole section of the movie, and I felt like her character was interesting enough. I was fine with it. But yeah, going in, I was like, this is the dumbest thing ever. Yeah. But I was impressed by that enough to where it made sense. But how I think what it's trying to imply is that there was no one that Awa is her father or mother, or that's probably what the eventual thing's going to be, if it's literally like a Holy Spirit impregnated Mary type thing or something. But which is strange for someone who's so atheistic. But clearly, and that's another thing I was going to say, this movie was very intensely spiritual, which is even more than the first movie, I thought, which was relatively. But especially, and one of the weirder things was that, I don't even remember what they're called, those weird whale creatures. And there's this whole connection that happens between one of the Sully sons and this kind of outcast whale who they had thought. So the whales don't commit any violence or war or murder or anything. And that whale had tried to like stop the whaling from happening or whatever that they're trying to do. I want to talk later about another aspect of like why they're whaling them that I thought was interesting, that the movie didn't go as deep into as I kind of would have been interested about. But that, and there's this whole connection of, there's this rogue whale that's been outcast because of its actions, which actually it was innocent of. All that was kind of interesting. That was like, took up a good 45 minutes of runtime. I mean, it was like a pretty extended storyline.
And I feel like that was the centerpiece of the Sully clan's ingratiation with the
sea people.
The sea people was the ultimate manifestation of that, of that connection that first movie has to the trees and to the jungle, kind of transferring that, of course, into the marine environment,
which isn't surprising considering his love of water.
Right, and of course, Cameron's. Right. I mean, and you can see this across his whole career, most especially with The Abyss and Titanic, I feel like, but.
and all the documentaries he's made
he's
about
has a great interest
diving
in that.
and scuba stuff that he's done. Yeah,
and I think the world building of this movie, like the first one, is very intense and very there was a whole. I want to mostly roll my eyes at this, but I kind of understand where people are coming from. The whole Avatar depression thing that happened of people walking out of the first movie, it was a whole phenomenon, and people being bummed at our whole real world can't reflect or be about this beautiful thing that's been created in the movie. And I feel like there's probably going to be a similar thing for some that happens.
But what do you mean by that?
So there were people. This. I don't remember what
they were depressed about the fact that our world is dying, or they were depressed about the fact that we can't live in that world.
Both. Okay. Basically, the real world is not as beautiful or picture perfect, or the connection we have to the real world is not comparable to what is in this movie or in these movies.
Well, as a Christian, all I can say is not that they're wrong to feel that way, but they're looking in the wrong place for that.
Well, even as an agnostic to atheist, I feel like James Cameron would even disagree with that, because I feel like the whole reason he's probably making these movies, other than to make money, is to show that no, we need to protect what we have, and this is all a parable or an allegory for what we're trying to protect.
Because he would say, no, that isn't what the world is. Yeah. Do you not know that? Are you not aware of this? Yeah, and also about, I want to live in that.
It's not real.
Okay, it's not. First of all, it's not real. Second, you want to live somewhere where you can't breathe the oxygen? I mean, I know they're saying, no, I want to be like the Na'vi. And I'm like, that's weird.
Yeah.
You're so weird as someone I know very
I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but I think there is something. This movie could only be created in the age of alternate reality / the internet / video games becoming more. I mean, this was the first movie too.
Yeah.
Increasingly a thing. I mean, literally it comes from deep religious place, but the whole idea of an avatar is that this is a representation of who I am in another world. And I feel like we as a society, a movie like Ready Player One, while not great, or a story like it, I feel like scratches this itch a little bit in terms of this desire for people to leave the real world and to check into this fantasy land, which these movies in some ways
and although the
the
soul and personality transference of Jake Sully to the Avatar's body is attempting to be a very Eastern kind of reincarnation belief, ultimately is the same thing as saying, no, I want to plug in and check out and just be in virtual reality. Yeah, literally.
Yeah.
So it's actually interesting that some of the most impressive action movies since the Matrix movies are the opposite, almost, of what that's saying is, no, I want to be part of the machine, or I want to be in this world. Now, granted, what that is almost, and it's almost works, I think, or does in a way, because it is saying, no, I want to plug into nature.
Yeah.
Right, which is different. But ultimately, it's still the same thing, because it's like, well, you can't really walk. And even though that's great that you can in this, that's just wish fulfillment.
Yeah.
And you're ultimately challenging the laws of nature by saying, no, I will do that. And it's like, no, well, it's not really you, but...
So I do think that's sometimes a troubling aspect of these movies. And I don't think it's... This is part of a larger philosophical trend, I feel like, that's been going on for the last, 20 years plus. And again, The Matrix was because there's some people even look at The Matrix, the way The Matrix looks in The Matrix, and say, oh man, I want to be in that world. It's like ugly, garish, world that is intentionally saying this is what we're turning our own world into.
Well, and that's what the Wachowskis would literally look at them and that meme of the guy, what are you talking about? Because that was clearly not
even
the
Matrix.
intent.
Was it Resurrections that come out last year? Was about some of these same things too, in terms of that in the world of that there was another Matrix on top of that convinced Neo that it was all a video game, and and this
that he created,
and I feel like that's one of the scarier aspects of not only these movies, but even with Marvel movies, whatever the big pop culture event movies are. This has been true to an extent across cinema's history, but is very true in the more digital age of filmmaking we live in, and especially with the rise of video games. And I feel like this movie, again, some of my problems with the movie are tied to this, even though I genuinely really liked it, is this idea to check out, to totally give yourself over to the machine. Because, I mean, something like The Fabelmans stands in stark contrast to this, because it's saying, like, you know, as we said, that it's Spielberg taking issue with his own relation to the machine.
Yeah.
I feel like, you know, James Cameron, you know, he's going to be a little younger than Spielberg, but is nonetheless an elder filmmaker by this point, certainly.
Yeah.
It's kind of like embracing the machine, and not only embracing the machine, making the machine even bigger.
Yeah.
As a result. And to that point, one of my least favorite things about this movie was the frame rate, which was something that the higher frame rate has been a conversation point really since the very first Avatar was when it was starting to be talked about. I think there were some select screenings of the original Avatar with a higher frame rate. And what we mean by frame rate is most films operate with 24 frames per second, which means, you know, and this is more of a film term, what film literally was, but certainly video technology replicates this. The idea that in traditional film you see 24 frames a second, meaning there are 24 still images that are run back to back to simulate movement.
If you don't understand this, go literally watch the beginning of The Fabelmans, which explicitly explains it.
Yeah.
But
like literally,
it's like James Cameron. Did you not watch that part?
Yeah.
Or did you think you could play God, sir?
With 3D, which has been frankly less of a conversation point with this movie than it was with the first movie.
And it's because you said that revival happened with it with the first movie. But yeah, it is strange that he didn't attempt that again.
I mean, and certainly 3D screenings of this are being shown, and it was designed to be in 3D. I know he's even trying to eventually produce glassless 3D, where you don't need glasses, but you see 3D in front of you, which I don't know what that's going to be exactly. But that
holograms.
But in general, high frame rate was meant to.
He needs to talk to George Lucas on that. See what he did for Star Wars, I guess.
Yeah, but to like when you wear 3D glasses, obviously you can get headaches sometimes, and it like plays with your head, and like you get confused. Literally, your brain gets confused what it's looking at sometimes. When you double it at 48 frames a second, it makes it easier for your eye to process 3D and your brain to process 3D. But then what happens is when you don't watch these movies in 3D, and even when you do, everything has this sped up look to it. And there's been a lot of discussions also in recent years about motion smoothing on TVs, that is the default setting now for most TVs. So believe it or not, most average Americans have become more accustomed to seeing things like this, mostly because the TVs are mostly set to be the default setting is motion smoothing. So this is something that he and Peter Jackson are huge advocates of. Jackson really pushed it with the Hobbit movies.
That's the first time I ever noticed that. I remember it very clearly. I remember standing in the Sam's Club in Hickory, watching on a TV, they were showing the first Hobbit movie, which I'd seen in theaters, but I don't recall that having that frame rate when I saw it.
Probably because it was 24 in the theater.
Right, but I remember seeing that on TV, and I kind of glanced at it and looked away and then looked back, and I was like, just looking at it for a while and was like,
something's not right here.
There's something weird about this. Now, motion smoothing on TVs works better than this did on the.
I think motion smoothing is usually not as many frames.
Right, it's like 36 or something like that. Yeah. Which is it doesn't look right, but it looks better. This looked very stilted. It looked like it would speed up, then it would slow down. Now, of course, that's not going to be against the movie itself as far as what it is technically and narratively. But that is something to mention because it took a while to adjust to that. I mean,
and eventually I did.
Right, but
I saw one tweet that really annoyed me just literally earlier today. Somebody had said something along the lines of like, in quotes, like, 48 frames per second makes it look like a video game. It's like, come up with a better criticism. Show your work. Somebody said.
What?
It's just like, how about it just doesn't look like real life? Now, we're talking about a movie where you have 10-foot-tall blue people. Okay, so I get we're not talking about real life here. But there is a certain, like... I'm not about to try to tell James Cameron, try to preach to him what the logic of cinema is, because he clearly... Frankly, I won't say he knows more than me or you or anybody, because he's a practitioner of it. He clearly is a very smart man who knows and thinks about these things intently.
Well, you can't make action sequences and facilitate action sequences like this or in any of his other movies without clearly being a genius. But
I would argue that 24 frames per second as the going standard for what cinema has mostly been over the course of its existence, would further ingratiate us and normalize us to what we're seeing. When you're already seeing alien environments at a higher frame rate, your like brain's kind of just instantly like almost confused, like what it's looking at, even though you understand and can process it moment to moment. But the higher frame rate just instantly throws a wrench in that and makes you have to work harder. As such, you're not really even sometimes listening to what characters are saying or taking in the story. You're worried about what the visuals are, which are clearly more what the architecture and design of this whole thing is. But
and I don't want to say this to sound haughty, but like for people like us who are cinephiles who watch tons of movies all the time, it's going to be still easier for us to make that leap and go, okay, I can follow. But just average people going to see this,
there's going to be a lot of this world building, I think, that goes by the wayside because they're not processing it.
But then, strangely, they're so into it. I don't get it. It's like I'm saying.
And I don't. This might sound derisive. I don't even mean it as derisive as it sounds. It's pretty colors. It's like it's just so much to behold that you just get sucked in, even if you don't totally understand it.
And so that just fascinates me because they are really good movies. Especially this one, I think is really good, and I was really impressed by everything about it for the most part, even though Sam Worthington is still in these movies and still trying
as you
to
said,
act,
one of the better things about it is that it kind of shifts focus away from just being about him to being about the kids, which are innately more interesting.
And I don't even remember their names because
and that's the thing, I can't remember that, but you remembered like there's the youngest girl.
Yeah,
there's the Sigourney Weaver character, and then there's the two brothers, and I really like that relationship in the movie.
Yeah, and that one's always covering for the other. The one is always the
younger one's always more troublesome. Yeah,
and but ultimately the whole movie is kind of a coming of age movie about him in its own way.
Which was the one that died?
Huh?
Which was the one that died?
The better one, right?
Oh, it was spoiler alert, I guess. Yeah, sorry about that. I forgot.
Yeah.
The better. Okay, that makes sense thematically. I just honestly couldn't remember because
it's visually the one that's troublesome is the one who lives.
Okay, that makes sense. I literally
because the other one was always covering for him all the time, and
because those two visually was harder for me to keep track of who was who.
Well, the one has weirder looking eyes. The one that's the boy that
I apologize for. I wasn't even thinking about throwing a spoiler in there, but
whatever.
Yeah.
But
I was shocked that happened. By the way, though.
Well, I figured one of them would,
but I mean, to have a kid, die. Right. I mean, that was a little bit of a surprise.
Yeah, because I kind of thought maybe that Jake Sully would die or something, or I didn't think Nateri would, but yeah, that was a little bit surprising, I guess. But I knew at some point one of them was going to get it. But yeah, that ultimately though, I thought that it was interesting. The movie's almost a coming of age movie for that character of the boy who does live, and that him maturing and being more responsible, I thought was interesting, and it didn't make it as much about, like I said, the adults, which was better. Nateri really took a back seat in this, which surprised me a little bit. But thankfully, she kind of got the whole. I was like, she ain't really been in this a whole lot, and then by the very end, it was like. Mommy's home kind of situation, and she went off and killed all these people, whatever. But
we can talk a little bit about Spider too. That was an interesting addition. He was basically a human child who had been left behind, and spoiler alert, turns out was Stephen Lang's child that he had fathered.
And that's a very interesting relationship that happens between the Avatar, Stephen Lang, and him, because it's like technically they have no relation whatsoever, but the consciousness has a relation to him inherently.
Very strange, but it works. And again, he's like this kind of jungle child, and he's lived his whole life basically on Pandora, and so sees himself more as a Na'vi, even though he's clearly not. He's a human. Him being kind of kidnapped by Stephen Lang's Avatar for most of the movie, and as you said, they form this unlikely bond that, again, as you said, technically they're not related, but that consciousness associates him as his own son. And that actually did help humanize the Lang character a bit.
Which is good because
otherwise he's like just pure villain.
Yeah, another spoiler, he lives at the end, so we're going to get more of him, I suppose. So, no, I was very impressed, because I was very impressed by all of that, because I went in very wary of, we're bringing Stephen Lang back again?
Because we were also like,
died. But all of that I thought worked really well for, like, it kind of stumbles early on. It's like, oh, you're a clone and Avatar, and you go kill Jake Sully because movie. But actually worked overall. Also funny to see, we were talking about this, how his, like, other goons that they brought back are all wearing these, like, Oakley sunglasses the whole time.
As a Na'vi,
Yeah, and it's like they're in their, like, tactical gear and stuff. Yeah. But that was just funny.
It's just kind of funny that deep down they're still humans. They think as humans, but now they're in these Na'vi bodies.
Yeah.
A larger thing too that I appreciate about these movies is how grab bag they are. Actually, is like it's almost every major sci-fi and or fantasy concept are somehow inserted into these movies, and it's almost like James Cameron, again, while I frankly resent the fact that he's going to be spending the rest of his career in this world and not doing anything else, essentially, he's like, well, this is my big play box. This is my big sandbox. Now I'm literally going to play with every conceivable concept, sci-fi or fantasy-wise, and again, combine the two, because it's not clearly just sci-fi or fantasy. I mean,
he comes up with some truly interesting, like, just creations of stuff, like the whole idea of when they're torturing Spider to find out where the camp is in the Hallelujah Mountains, which I still laugh at as a whole, the Hallelujah Mountains. Anyway, and they're like basically torturing him by looking, they're like scanning his brain, and literally they can just see thoughts on like a computer or like a hologram computer. And if he even thinks of where it is, they'll know where it is, which is like, I would think would be impossible to beat, but whatever. That was just very kind of unspoken random scene of that, but it's just like such a random interesting like idea. Then also just that whole idea of like the memory fluid, brain fluid, cranial fluid of the whale things is basically what they're using to literally stop aging for humans. And so that's something I wish there would have been a little more of in the movie. I thought that they'll probably talk more about that in later sequels. But that's another example of like trying to cheat death or attain this like immortality that the movies are talking about all the time, which is strange for that message to be in a movie where literally the protagonist becomes a virtual reality clone, but you know, whatever. But yeah, so in that there are a lot of interesting kind of asides that he has in the movies that I wish he would spend more time on sometimes than simply viewing, oh, here's water again, which is great because I love that stuff in the movie too, and that's ultimately what the movie's about.
You made this comment after after it had happened when we were watching the movie, but there's that kind of frankly mind-blowing shot of looks like they're skimming the water, but it's like upside down. You know what I mean? Like of him and the whale, and
it's kind of like a moment in Interstellar. There's similar where they're flying against the wave or whatever. And I think I literally said, that's what we pay him for. Like literally, it's just like, I mean, you see stuff like that, and you're like, Do you want to talk something about the climax a little bit, because I feel like that's a big aspect of the movie.
I mean, this movie had a very hyped upon third act climactic kind of battle sequence, and I think that definitely lived up to the hype in terms of, you know, one-upping what was done in the first movie, and then in many ways kind of eclipsing some of James Cameron's own work even in other films that were overall I think superior. But it does make me wonder though, like, how much bigger can we get with these climaxes or finales, and what the future of this franchise holds
that this was so big but literally only like included a whaling ship and some boats, and it was that massive, and it's like, what are we gonna do now? Like, but gotta say, of course, that Brendan Cowell, who played Mick Scoresby, who was like the Australian or New Zealand,
he's got a quota. He said several times.
Literally, his demise is one of the greatest I've seen in a while. Just totally hilarious. Randomly more gory than I was expecting too, because for a movie that's PG-13,
and it was fulfilling. It's like, well, if we don't get Stephen Lang's character to finally die, like we at least get that. The thing is, though, if they kill Stephen Lang's character, they're probably just going to have other avatars to put him in. You know what I mean? That his literally his consciousness will always be.
Just gonna be like it's gonna be like Sheev Palpatine,
or like Agent Smith too. In the Matrix movies, that's like true too. Similar thing,
but no, really great action sequences and it was, you know, he always does that anyway. I mean, I was talking about this to some people this morning, actually, in Sunday school. We were talking about this a little bit. Some people, and I was saying, yeah, that movie, I was saying it was 3 hours. They were like, whoa. I was like, yeah. I said, you watch any of his movies, and the climax goes on for, like, the last hour or whatever. Yeah, right. It's always like, oh, okay. Oh, wait. There's okay. There's more of this, which is good. I like that.
Yeah.
Because there aren't many people who do that. But he makes really long climaxes that sometimes could be shorter. I thought this one was more fine than the original Avatar. Felt like, yeah, okay, I think we're done. Oh, wait, there's more. Like, and it kind of went on and on.
I gotta say, I know this movie had already got a rap too for maybe having a little bit of a laggy second act. I didn't really think there's anything. There was no moment in this movie I was bored and thinking, oh, I wish this was over. Right. I mean, everything had, even the sequence of like the one boy like making up with the water people's kids. And they're like, oh, yeah, truce. But then they go out, and like you could see from a mile away, oh, they were going to trick him, and that he
another smaller whale creature.
Yeah. And like that whole sequence, like, is one that in theory you could cut or minimize, but is so essential to the movie and the thematics of the movie that it's like there's really not anything I could have seen being cut from this.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like it all works. I mean, and I wouldn't really cut anything other than, again, some of the frame rate issues I have, and that's more of a technical
that doesn't have anything to do with the length.
And so, if anything, the movie would probably slow down, if anything, with that. But any other final thoughts? And also, what does the future of this franchise hold to you potentially, or like where do we go from here?
I don't know, but I was so impressed by this that I'm highly anticipating anything else. I mean, because for me, and a lot of people say this, oh, it's great to have these movies that are like original movies. Yeah. I mean, clear, like we said, they're kind of taken from everything, but they are truly original, new. It's this our era's new thing as far as like, a fantasy world, because we have it like everything else we've been dealing with for a while is so old, like Dune or Lord of the Rings or Star Wars or the Marvel movies, even. I mean, or the DC movie. Like, these big blockbusters are all on this kind of level of pedigree. To actually have someone make something like this was impressive, as it was impressive now as it was in 2009. And it just felt like an event movie, and it was. And I felt like it lived up to that. It was packed at the theater. It's going to continue to be packed. It's already
there were people clapping.
It's already it's already going to make its money back. I mean, it's nice to see James Cameron make a movie. I mean, and even though it took forever, and he's always going to be making these now. Not only the fact that it was a new Avatar movie, but just the fact it was a new James Cameron movie, and he can always deliver on a blockbuster. Just shows how starved we are for that in general, and that why this is an event movie is because it should be,
And also that he's like one of the few people who makes event movies that creates his own thing, like we said, is creator driven,
and it is very distinct.
Other than I think now he is in a very discreet rivalry and not personal with someone who produced a trailer that we're going to talk about here in a little bit, who's really the only other person in the class that he's in right now in terms of his movies all being events as well.
Yeah.
I think that's the only person really has and again, and they come from very different places about their perception of film and digital and effects also. But really my big ask is we gotta have that Arnold be a Na'vi. Yeah. Like, what's that gonna be? Like, he's obviously worked with James
now what
Cameron
they should do
times,
and our who was it? Our mom that said this, I think, is like, why don't they do like a volcano thing or something? Is like, because we went and saw it with her, she really loved it too. But that she was saying, oh, like, what's the only other thing they could do now, like something like that? And I thought that was an interesting idea. What they should do is take Arnold, make him like the Na'vi king of that area, and do a whole Conan the Barbarian kind of thing. Like Conan the Destroyer was very like fire themed movie. Like, do that basically, but like.
Who knows?
Crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and hear the lamentation of the women. Like,
Well, it's kind of like when you think about what other landscapes of Pandora could be. I mean, the first one and the early parts of this with kind of the tree people, like that covers a lot of possible landscapes in of itself. You know what I mean? Of like thinking about like say like South America or parts of Africa.
Snow would be one.
Snow, I mentioned, would be a new landscape for this. Or maybe like an underground people too that could tie to the volcano thing as like
or
a whole
you could even
rock
do
people
in the sky somehow. But you already kind of did that with the Hallelujah Mountains already. How's that even work, by the way? I know we talked about that in the first movie, but
it might be some self-perpetuating thing with the clouds, that the clouds are like both above and below it, and that it like the water falls and condensates and becomes
that I can make sense of. I'm talking about how is it even floating at all? Is what I'm talking about. Like, it really makes no sense.
It's not real. So
yeah,
you just kind of just say
no. I'm fine with the waterfalls because I'm like, well, yeah, it would be a cycle. It's kind of the same thing. Yeah, that makes sense. I'm saying now that makes sense, Kyle. Let's not get into that. No, I'm talking about I'm floating at all. It's just like what I don't know. But yeah, no, I'm very much into this. I'm probably gonna go see it again at some point. So.
And James Cameron will find a way to differentiate and make something different. I know it's already been said that maybe the fifth and final one, if that's how many they're going to do, is going to take place on Earth. So to return to Earth and see what that
Welcome to Earth,
which we got very brief glimpses of in the original. So we'll see how that develops. So that's Avatar: The Way of Water. Would you see this again in the theater?
That's what I was just saying. I'm probably going to see it again, yeah.
Would you see it in 3D if offered the chance?
Only because, just to kind of see it again in a different way. I mean, I'm no 3D fan, but if it were a choice between the 3D and a normal frame rate, I'd choose the normal frame rate. But since the frame rate's weird, might as well just do the 3D. It's going to look better than
we've seen it at least once in 2D anyways.
So, but yeah, maybe.
Yeah, I think I might too. We'll see.
Yeah.
So that's Avatar: The Way of Water in theaters everywhere. So go check it out. There's only 1 billion places. Another big vaunted...
And there's only $1 billion to make.
And, movies like these are very important because they represent crown jewels of the industry for good or for ill. They literally represent both the past, present, and future of what the industries are, and James Cameron worked time and time and again has represented that. And a big part of any time you get a movie that is this big are the trailers that come with it, because all the studios know that if we want a big hit next year or in a few months, we need to slap a trailer on with this, because that's going to be one of the biggest audiences our trailers are going to get other than online.
Yeah. So
there were several trailers that were notable that we saw with this. One of which, again, ties back a little bit to our discussion of Spielberg, even though he himself is not directing this franchise anymore, which is the first ever that's not happened with, is James Mangold stepping behind the director's chair for Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, which, I'll be honest, when I first saw this trailer online a few weeks ago, I had a slightly better idea of it or take of it. I was like, oh, this looks okay, But to see it on the big screen, sometimes things are not, when it's not looking good on the big screen, that's when some alarm bells should be ringing, because this movie is, of course, the latest and the last, in quotes, at least of the Harrison Ford Indiana Jones movies. It will be the last of those. He's made that clear multiple times. This is the last one of these he's doing. And we've already had, felt like that was the case with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. And that's been like 15 years ago, I know, but okay, almost 20 years ago, practically. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, what did you think of this one?
No. Not into this at all. Yeah. Don't care for it. In fact, there's only one of these trailers that we're going to talk about I'm into. Yeah. So, no. First of all, just because, what are we going to do with the Indiana Jones we haven't already done? There's Nazis in this again. How that's possible, I'm not sure.
Some sequences they've de-aged Harrison Ford also.
I'm just like, what is any of this at all? Don't care. No.
That has the same problem that the new Star Wars movies have had, that we cannot move past Empire versus Rebels. It's, the Nazis are still the big bads of these, and people hated it and whatever, and, it's got its problems, but Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, one thing I liked about it is that it updated it a little bit. It said, all right, the Soviets are now the enemies, and so...
and changed the locale to like South America, which was different. So
but like what happened with Star Wars post Lucas, it seems as though it's like, oh, we're gonna just give people what we think that they want.
Glad you made it out of South America kind of situation, you know.
I do really think a lot of Phoebe Waller-Bridge, who's going to be in this as kind of the passing the torch kind of role, I guess, as his goddaughter, I think the movie said. And again, updating this for the 60s a little bit, that'll be in of itself interesting just to see. Of course, we're going to see this movie probably, but
I'll definitely see it, no doubt.
But again, and I do think a lot of James Mangold. I do like him quite a bit. And I do think overall it is better that somebody other than Spielberg, even though we just hyped him up endlessly, is doing or approaching this series. But again, this is a good example of something that, I thought looked okay on my phone to watch on a big screen. I'm like, I don't know about all this. We'll give it a fair shake when it comes out. I mean, we like Mads Mikkelsen. He'll be the villain.
Oh, I didn't even notice him in the trailer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Antonio Banderas is in. I did notice him. John Rhys Davies is back. Toby Jones, I saw him real briefly. I was look at that. Mm-hmm. Let's see. I'm looking at other people here. Tosh Kretschmann, he's in like everything. This guy.
Yeah.
Got of course Boyd Holbrook as well. Martin McDougall. This guy. He's like in some movies. Batman Begins, Saving Private Ryan. I don't remember any of that. Yeah, I mean, it's got some people, it's like, okay. But yeah, just big no overall on all that. Don't really get... there was a time when I was really into Indiana Jones. And I'm not saying I still don't love Indiana Jones, but I don't know. It's kind of just like, especially for Spielberg movies. It's like you got the first one, which is great, but then after that, it's kind of like we're kind of just spinning our wheels
Temple
here.
Of Doom, though.
Oh, yeah, no. And I mean, I think overall I like them less as they go along, except for I like Kingdom of the Crystal Skull more than Last Crusade.
I'm not going to disagree with that, but that would be a very controversial opinion for most people to hear.
I could give a crap.
There's a lot of people think Last Crusade it might be the best
one.
Oh,
yeah, they're idiots. I mean, sorry if you think, well, not really, because you're the problem, boy. But
or girl.
Or gal. Guy or gal. No, I'm not into that movie. I think the dumbest thing ever filmed is when he meets Hitler and Hitler signs that book. Is literally the dumbest thing ever. That's like when people talk about the only thing dumber than that to me is the whole Princess Leia moment in The Last Jedi, which never forget got that long clap. You remember that? I hope that man is dead.
That movie's 5 years old now.
That's hard to believe. Wow,
that's 5 years ago that came out. And here we are.
5 years ago, I lost 20,000 men in the blink of an eye. And the world just effing watched. Sorry, I'm quoting Shepard a little bit too much today, but back from the Brink Captain. That's what.
But
said,
as we said, we're mostly like, I'm done with this franchise. Yeah. This will be one that we do, frankly, just give the courtesy watch.
Oh no, I will go see. Oh, no doubt,
and give a chance. But I agree.
No,
I'm,
not unless I'm just like literally anything else is going on, and then I'll.
I think it's coming out next summer, I think.
Yeah, I probably won't have anything going on.
I always got to mention this when if Kingdom of the Crystal Skull ever comes up, is that I'll never forget, came out in the summer of 2008, which is a big summer for movies. The first Iron Man, Dark Knight came out later that summer.
I guess that was a little later than I thought. So yeah, it's been almost 15 years, I guess.
But our cousin Philip saw it and said, "Oh my God, people are really going to love this." Which he still laughs about, and then of course they did not.
I was watching some of that movie on TV back about a year ago, maybe. It's been a while since I've seen that whole
Ray
thing.
Winstone, friend of the pod.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. What I love about that is he changes sides like 15 times.
That's that a total that we watched the friggin' the pirate sequels and just let's do that again.
Yeah, but and there's
love the first Pirates.
Oh yeah,
unambiguously.
Yeah, and like the other two.
Yeah,
fun enough. Yeah. Now the whole. Calypso stuff and that. Oh my God, that's just like what but yeah, that there's that moment, the fridge and everybody talks about it all the time. It's dumb, but I was watching that on TV though here a while back and I was like, this is pretty dumb. It's like, because for a long time I was kind of like, well, whatever, I don't really think, but I was like, no, this is dumb. But
who knows, we might one up ourselves here. We'll see. Barbie, I'm a Barbie girl in a Barbie world, which apparently has been
my
made
favorite lyric of that is we're just getting started.
Which apparently, like the Mattel and whoever made
Mattel Electronics presents B-17 Bomber.
And who's that band that did that song? I don't even.
Aqua.
They did not like that they did that song, and that's been subject to all this legal crap between Mattel and them over the years. So I think Greta Gerwig's even.
And I'm from Mattel.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I'm from a company that was bought by Mattel. Like,
as a kid, you hear that line in Toy Story, and you're like, "What?" And then you grow up, and oh, okay.
Like how Kenner was bought by Hasbro's, Warner Bros.
I'm a Barbie girl in a Barbie world. The latest Greta Gerwig movie. We need to start here,
okay?
Because Greta Gerwig.
This is the only good place to start.
Greta
Gerwig,
let's go ahead. Literally, Lady Bird and Little Women are two of the best films made in the last 20 years.
I agree.
I mean, they're amazing movies.
I'm agreeing with you.
I'm waiting for the knife to come out. Margot Robbie, one of our pretty great new stars, I would say.
Yeah.
Ryan Gosling.
She'll probably be really good in Babylon.
My son.
Yeah, oh yeah.
My child.
Definitely.
My little baby boy, Ryan Gosling. New teaser for this came out. What did you think? I'm going to hide behind the camera.
Well, I want to first of all go ahead and say that from the outset, a Barbie movie being made. We heard that a Barbie movie was being made before we knew that Greta Gerwig was attached. Correct? Yeah. Yes? Okay.
Correct.
Making sure. Correct. Yeah. And so I, from the beginning, was like, didn't pay attention to it. Okay, there's a Barbie movie.
You're right. Okay.
It's like, oh yeah, okay. So Adam Sandler's been trying to make a Candyland movie for the past 20 years. Like I care about that, you know. Okay, whatever. Barbie movie, whatever. Then eventually it said that it's going to be Greta Gerwig making it.
I think originally too that there was a time where
Ben Shapiro once said, and this is where the lies begin.
Yeah. Big fan.
Yeah, no, not at all. Ben Shapiro can go straight to hell.
I think
but anyway,
Amy Schumer was going to be Barbie in it originally, and then things happen. I don't know what, and then
that would have been so frustrating because it would have been a whole. And I like Amy Schumer, but that would have been a whole aspect to it of a plus size Barbie. People would have argued about that. I would not want to do
Cameron Jackson. You know about her and Amy Schumer, him and Amy Schumer's like whole diss back and forth. Yeah.
Doc. Anyway,
I'm a Barbie girl.
But so then we all had to start paying attention to it genuinely because she was attached.
Well, also that co-written by Noah Baumbach, which it says it said on the Dolby screen, like Barbie, Greta Gerwig, and then like Noah Baumbach's name, which is like, what world are we living in? Like the director of Kicking and Screaming, co-writing a Barbie
but it's
movie.
Literally director of Squid and the Whale making it, writer of mini movies.
Yeah.
I was trying to think, what's some movies he's like?
He's done some Wes
Life
Anderson
Aquatic,
movies.
Yeah. But anyway, so I'm looking at this, and I'm like, it's like, I wasn't caring or paying attention. Then it's like I had to drop everything and just cross my arms and be like, okay,
this is a thing.
Yeah, this is a thing I have to recognize exists now. Yeah. Like, I could literally give a crap about anything about this. Like, it literally looks like. As a movie, I mean, it looks inventive and imaginative. I'm not going to say that. I mean, it looks colorful. And whatever,
let's just take it apart bit by bit here. Most of the trailer is a very direct parody and homage to 2001: A Space Odyssey, which was not at all a direction I was expecting the teaser for this to be.
I literally thought it was fake when I first heard about it. I was like, "There's no way that's real."
Yeah.
And no, it was.
Yeah.
And I saw it twice, and within.
Some of it's literally shots taken from 2001. I mean, that people have done already side-by-side comparisons, and it's literally the same shots, just with a different tint. And Warner Brothers owns both films, so they can do that.
Yeah.
But
yeah, they can do that. That's fine.
I wonder what the Kubrick estates, by the way, have been tweeting all this positive stuff about it. Like I know, like
he would think it's hilarious. I just already know he would love it, but.
Or be more confounded by it.
He would just be like, what? I don't know. There was that. I saw that meme. It was funny. It was like that picture of him on the set of like, probably on the set of like Clockwork Orange. I'm not sure what movie it's on set of. And he's like, it's like him, like real serious. It's like one ticket for Barbie, please, or whatever. Oh my God.
To me, let me just say,
you go ahead,
let me say, like, I still have questions about all this, but I'm more like, what is this going to be? And just the wonder of, like, all these talented people. I have a deep love of Greta Gerwig. I have a deep love of Ryan Gosling. Really like Margot Robbie. I'm just really like, what are you going to do with this? Is this going to be a critique of the Barbie brand? Probably not as much as people would like it to be. Or think it's going to be, or will talk themselves into saying it is.
That would make a good press release for this. See, the whole thing's a perfect press release. As a movie, though, already I'm just like, I've seen it. I already know what it is. It's a Barbie movie. Okay. Let's go to the shop, Ken.
Yeah.
Let's go roller skating, Ken. Like,
I think some people saying that it's like it could be this generation's Clueless, which I think is a pretty good little movie enough. Fine enough. Alicia Silverstone movie from the 90s.
Yeah, I mean,
in terms of that pop sensibility that it's clearly going to play with, and probably for Gerwig, that's like something she wants to play in a little bit after what Lady Bird was and what Little Women were visually. That she wants to flex her muscles a little bit and try something a little different.
James Cameron. She probably wants to make money. Part of it.
Yeah,
that's fine. She can do that.
You know, Lady Bird was a original movie that similar to what we're talking about, the Fabelmans. I think less so a version of her life, or Little Women was, of course, had been adapted already multiple times, and her take on it was still something new and fresh. So really, I'm just saying, let's just wait. Let's just wait and see. I think a lot of Greta Gerwig. Like, I think she's bought enough capital with me personally to just see what this is going to be. But again, there are a lot of people on film Twitter that are already totally in love with it.
And that's what annoys me too.
Quite be there,
Like, it feels like the movie everybody wants. Why? I have no clue. Because it's like, I love everyone involved. Then it's Barbie.
Yeah.
This is not me just saying it's not at all because like I never played with Barbies or that I'm a man. That doesn't have anything to do with it. It's just like Barbie. Is it what?
Yeah.
Barbie. Well, it's literally a toy. Like what
they're gonna. Like, there's been discussions about
G.I. Joe is just as stupid. Like I mean,
there have been. I think like the idea with this is going to be a little bit more meta.
Like the
a
fact there's a Mario movie
like,
now too. So
which we're not even going to talk about that. But that it is going to, like, I think there's an expectation that it's going to grapple with, quote, what is Barbie as a brand? What is Barbie? Is it a healthy thing? I think undoubtedly most people would say it's not a healthy thing for girls.
It wasn't for Sally Draper.
Yeah. Another fictional
Why aren't
person.
you asleep?
Yeah. But, I mean, so I'm just going to say, like, let's just wait. I mean, the left turn of the trailer alone was enough for me to go, like, this is going to be something a little different. Like, so.
Admittedly, that was definitely not what I was expecting.
Yeah. So we'll see. We'll report back to you. And I don't know if you're going to see it, but I definitely will.
You would have to put a gun to my head to keep me away. Like, I'm dead serious. There's no way I'm missing it. Like,
so we'll definitely be talking about it.
No, literally. I will be there.
Yeah.
You can count on it. Like, but I don't know. I don't get it. I don't know. I don't understand what people are so into about this.
There's been a lot of people, too, talking about, like, almost a surprise by people's part that they're, like, that there are still references of this size of 2001, which I'm like, a movie still is iconic and still has a cultural
I mean, Tim Burton did that with
footprint.
Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. We all forgot about that. The Wonka bar.
I forgot about that.
There's
a lot about that movie. I forget. Yeah.
Light me some skin, soul.
Yeah.
That
now, Tim Burton's Barbie. That would be... what would that be? I don't know. Maybe that'd be Wednesday. I don't know.
Ken smoking meth. I don't know what's that. A movie I am anticipating.
Well, okay, so this is another whole concept we need to talk about.
Yeah.
This and a Barbie and Oppenheimer, the latest film from Christopher Nolan, have the same exact release date. So this is a real, like, line in the sand, like, do you want the boy Happy Meal toy or the girl's Happy Meal toy?
The Earth, like, yeah.
So... And I really hope that both these movies keep the release date because it's going to be a hilarious dichotomy of choices. Again, I'm eagerly anticipating both. I have more assurances about Oppenheimer because we're talking about
because he is
Nolan
the man
here.
who moved the Earth, as we know.
So this is Christopher Nolan's first film since Tenet, which, as we've talked about,
called Tenet.
had among the more strange releases in modern times I could think of.
It was something to behold, I'll tell you.
And
the Tom Cruise, that was my best birthday present that year, because it was literally that night he released that he tweeted that, and literally that next morning, my birthday morning, my baby's first birthday morning, was that video came out, and everybody was talking about it, and it was just like, what? And so that, combined with the fact that he was really pushing it to be in theaters, very controversially because of COVID going on at the time.
That was also part of his larger falling out with Warner Brothers due to the release of that movie, but also their insistence on transitioning to more like theatrical release windows shortening and more things going to streaming more quickly. And so this is his first film he's making with Universal. It's still a Syncope production, basically his own production company. And it is, it might seem like a minor thing, but it is strange to see this new big Christopher Nolan movie coming out under the Universal label, which Universal has kind of suddenly, now with Jordan Peele in their corner as well, become one of the most director-friendly studios in town. This is, of course, going to be not exactly sure like a Cradle to Grave, probably not that, but basically a look at J. Robert Oppenheimer, who, of course, helped develop the Manhattan Project, which, of course, created atomic weapons for the United States, which were used against Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, and about the development of that project, the ethics of, I would presume, of that project, and the aftermath of those decisions. What do you think about Nolan taking this on as a subject, and what you got from the trailer?
Well, obviously,
Cillian Murphy as J. Robert Oppenheimer.
It fits everything of what his movies are ultimately always been about. I think it makes it, because his movies have always been about spectacle. But I feel like this is the first that's truly going to reckon with the danger of that spectacle, because and we talked about that with Nope earlier this year. Which this, I think, wasn't that when the first trailer for this came out was with Nope?
The very first teaser, yeah.
The Man Who Moved the Earth.
Which at this point was the only thing that had been out for it.
And then this just came out, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and it's strange. It's weird to see him make a biopic in its own way, but I feel like you said, it fits because he's been building up to making an Oppenheimer movie.
I mean, the last so many years, especially between Dunkirk, which I think we would agree is one of his very best films, top 2 or 3, I would say, from him. Which, of course, is set during World War II. Then I recently just rewatched Tenet just a few days ago, literally, and I would give the movie probably 3 out of 5 stars. I mean, there's some, it made marginally more sense. There is still some next level action in that movie, though, that people talk, again, and I want to maybe just briefly dip into this, like, people talk a lot about, James Cameron's the master of the modern action movie. I mean, Christopher Nolan not only, I think, really is, but also insists on
it's hard when
many
you
practical
don't
effects.
Make movies for a long time.
That's partially what I'm saying is Nolan has a resume over the last 20 years. Of course, Cameron's goes beyond that and goes back into the 80s and the 90s. And I mean, you look at that Terminator, Aliens, Terminator 2. I mean, really, truly great all action movies. Yeah, all those. And then
True Lies. But
Nolan has been putting in the work year after year over the last 20 years. I mean, dipped his toe into the superhero movie and did some great work there, and has moved on past that. And is also, I think he deserves credit as being really the only director I can think of who dipped into the world of superhero comic book filmmaking and came out the other side
and is able to actually still make movies.
Does things that demand attention.
Right.
And so Tenet has some really great next level action, like the thematics of it get a little lost to me.
Yeah.
And what it's actually trying to say. But funnily enough, there are some scenes that discuss the theories of J. Robert Oppenheimer, and so like this literally between Dunkirk and then Tenet feels like, of course this is the next step for him to do. And also, I think he did a Total Film interview recently where some information about the movie was being trickled out because of that. And his is clear, his work with Cillian Murphy multiple times, has a deep love and admiration for him, has wanted to put him in a starring role in one of his movies. I mean, he was really great in Dunkirk and the small role that he had in that, and of course had been in Inception and the Batman movies before that. But I'll be curious to see him as the lead of one of these movies. And again, a lot of Nolan's movies, I also recently rewatched Interstellar, and that has mostly held up, I think, really well. A lot of Nolan's movies are about, like, an Inception, too, are about, like, again, as you said, giving us this spectacle, but also like, no, but let's stop and think about the ideas behind this. And I think some people could roll their eyes at that. So just give me the spectacle, like, just give me the James Cameron version of this.
Yeah,
like,
but it's like, but
just,
this is literally a man creating the man who moved the earth. Like, I'm sorry, I just say that all the time. It's in the first teaser, which is just hilarious.
It's also good to know that Robert Downey Jr. is in a movie again. A real movie.
In this?
He's got a big role in it. Yeah, he's not in the trailer. I don't think really.
Well, I didn't know that.
Josh Peck,
but, but
Megan, like, he's gonna nuke
Megan,
her.
like, yeah,
nuke her.
Robbie, like, yeah, Oppenheimer, Fat Man, Little Boy. I don't know. But the fact that literally he created a weapon that killed all the people that did.
And I know he really grappled with that, and dealt with the ethics of that, which have been parsed over again.
And that's been parsed over as a result of also Albert Einstein's connection to that.
And frankly, it's an argument that never grows stale, because that's literally, ever since you create weapons like that, that should be the probably single most important thing we think about and concern ourselves with are the security of such weapons, which of course was the staple of the Cold War, and we don't live in a Cold War world anymore. But even with the Ukraine, which actually features prominently in Tenet, which I totally didn't remember or forgotten about. I think it's coming out at a very important time for us to still consider and think about these things. And this is something that, again, will frankly never grow stale as long as these weapons continue to exist.
And the teasers in this, the teaser in this trailer, I think, has adequately, just even by nature of the explosions, let alone what they do in the trailer, are like genuinely frightening. Like,
and I think too,
to even do that in a trailer, let alone what the movie's going to be.
Very legendarily Episode 8 of Twin Peaks: The Return dealt with some of these things, and what I loved about that was with Lynch, made that almost the inciting incident for the evil of Bob and everything that came out of Twin Peaks is tied
Bob,
to those.
Robert Oppenheimer,
is
the
tied,
connections
is like tied
all
to
the terminals are connected.
But I think it's very interesting that with Twin Peaks, how that is depicted in that is the inciting incident for the Great American Evil, which of course is what the Twin Peaks as a series, a movie, and another series is most concerned with. And so to see Nolan tackle this feels like the inevitable step for him in terms of dealing with similar ideas, and the ideas of like, this is almost a Jimmy Neutron or Fairly Odd Parents concept of like this great thing. Be careful what you wish for, because you have that with Interstellar, with Inception, with even Tenet, these technologies.
It's called Tenet.
That also, like, with all those technologies, there exists this, like, thing that's on the other side of it that we can't see and can't control. With Interstellar and Tenet, there's talk of future beings, aliens, things sending things back to us, communicating. I think this will be a chance for Nolan to say, no, this is not a science fiction concept. This is a real thing also. There's not like
and something that I thought about while I was watching it is that whole question of like, what did they think it was actually going to do when they made it?
I think they
had an idea.
I don't know about all the history of what that development was, but I think there were genuine concerns of like what we are doing to atoms in the like to rip apart. Possibly,
like what will that do to the Earth, the man
time
who moved the Earth? I mean,
but like the idea of like, are we literally going to rip apart reality by even using such a weapon? Now we know that that's not exactly what happened, but
that still lives with us.
Yes,
even
the legacy of those decisions. So and also just the fact that this is clearly going to be like a historical drama that has moments of spectacle, but are going to be almost like mournful of it's like Nope almost, like you said. It's like it's kind of very similar what we presume it to be like what Nope was saying. I think again is a chance for Nolan to prove why he's the most important, exciting director to work in this space. Why
he's the man who moved
in this space, and just to for him again to make a movie that's about these very questions, but again, it's not a science fiction concept. It's no, this is something that happened, and to grapple with that. And also, there's been a lot of talk over the last so many days and week that apparently they have filmed what the atomic weapon looked like without CGI, which is literally like, what did they do? Set off a nuke and put an IMAX camera there to film it? I mean, what's
it's like that. You remember
be?
There's that comic book panel of Superman filming the atomic bomb explosion. Like, was it literally that? Like, what do they do? Like, yeah. That's hilarious. But
that's
just hilarious, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's that atomic weapon thing. Remember that?
Yeah. Out of all three of these trailers, I think this is the one that we're most anticipating and excited for. Yeah. Although I am like, what is Barbie going to be? But with
now, Barbie made the biggest statement out of the group. And
well, that is operating with the most surprise or wow factor, I think, of what it is trying to be. But, of course, Nolan is a proven commodity by this point. We're big fans. We love him. I mean, I feel like it's a, quote, basic opinion to have. But, I mean, Nolan is getting... I mean, he's now worked with over a 20-year period. He's getting, frankly, more in a space to be compared with the Spielbergs and the James Camerons of the world in terms of how many...
Yeah.
His body of work by this point and what it means to cinema, and every movie of his is an event in the same way that it is for those directors.
And they make
as well.
and they make a lot of money. I mean, they're well attended. It's not like somebody doing that and then it's kind of like, oh, okay, whatever. Like,
and that a lot of people don't really criticize Nolan of ripping off his own movies. What criticisms they have in some ways are them being derivative of his own works.
Yes,
which I think is interesting that people only compare you to yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, in comparison to...
I mean, that was a Hitchcock, and he's a lot like Hitchcock. He's been compared to Hitchcock his whole career. Mm-hmm. That's a Hitchcock problem. I mean, and if that's your problem, then...
That's what I'm saying.
That's like, whatever. I mean,
you're a high value place in cinema. So that's that. Again,
do we want to talk briefly before we move to the movies about the World Cup real quick?
We skipped that. I forgot. Yeah.
Which I'd watched
Yeah, you take
earlier.
the lead on this.
First of all, I want to say that was the single greatest sporting event I've ever watched. Was thrilling in every way.
The final between Argentina and France, which
Argentina won, which I was kind of wanting France to win really bad. I'm a big fan of Mbappe, but I was glad to see Messi win. Mbappe's already won one, so
4 years ago.
It ain't like it's the end of the world or anything.
Yeah,
they both play on PSG, which is funny. So. Right next to PSP. You remember that one?
Or ESPN.
Or ESP. I must have ESPN or something. Just
ADHD,
a totally like one of the best ways to spend 3 hours that I can think of a sporting event. I mean,
because it started off.
It was just like a total disaster on France's part. I mean, everybody's going to know this by now, but. Defense, they were playing defense the whole time, couldn't get the ball at all in their box or out of their box and into the Argentine box.
Yeah.
Just totally awful. They had a penalty kick. First goal was a penalty kick from Messi, then Di Maria scored a goal. I don't remember who scored their third one. That might have been Messi, I think. Maybe, yeah, I think. And then eventually in the second half, Mbappe finally scored a penalty kick, and then immediately, pretty soon after that, scored a goal, and then scored another goal later. Eventually, it went down to, I think it was 2-2, and then it was 3-3.
Yeah. But it kept giving you this idea, well, Argentina's finally pulling away.
And then it kept, and totally amazing comeback by France. They pretty much took over in the second half. Just a totally amazing game to watch. I was very happy I got to see that, and it went down to penalty kicks, and that was pretty much everybody knew Argentina was going to win at that point because they were better at those. Lloris, who's the goalkeeper for France, he has a little trouble with that, but he played an amazing game. I mean, he had some great saves. He played a lot more than the other goalkeeper did about saves and stuff, so... just a really great just overall experience to get into the World Cup and be into soccer now has been really cool.
Yeah, talk a little bit about that. This World Cup's been a bit of a game changer for you in terms of your interest in
part
soccer,
of it's just a lot of the people surrounding me in my life, mainly the students I have now are real into soccer, and me watching them play soccer has got me into it, and it's just a different thing to watch, and as great as American football is, there's a certain other kind of adrenaline that you get from watching a game like this because it's constant motion, constant movement. That was so thrilling to actually see. And no, it was. If you missed it, you truly missed one of the best things ever. I mean, even the guys who were commentating it said this is probably the best World Cup final ever, or at least in a long time. So that was great to see a great game.
Yeah, because you don't necessarily get that in the finals of anything.
And I thought originally I was like, oh man, this is just gonna suck. They're just gonna get beat awful. And then in the second half, that's when it really picked up. And so it was a truly transcendent experience. I gotta say, even when it didn't go the way I totally wanted it to, it was something else. I mean, it was crazy. But, yeah.
And I feel like I don't know, as someone who's among the most casual fan. I mean, I like watching soccer. I'm not necessarily a fan to the extent that you are, but it does seem that every time there's a World Cup, or certainly the success of the women's team here in America the last so many years, interest in football or soccer is growing in America with every passing year. I feel like it's a little bit bigger than it was the last time around. So it seems like this year it went up a notch even where it was.
Well, it got me. Yeah. So, yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I didn't watch the first half of this game, but saw the second half really in the ending, and it was thrilling for me to see as well. We're going to go ahead and take a break, though. You're going to hear a TV promo. I think it's an ABC promo from the 80s or 70s.
I don't want to die dead kind of thing.
Yeah. Of the year without a Santa Claus.
Sunday, poor Santa's tuckered out.
Nobody really cares anymore.
And all the elves are out of work.
What?
And it will surely be a blue Christmas unless there's a miracle in the nick of time.
Christmas, see?
It's big trouble if it's a year without Santa.
And here we are, we're back. That's from, I love that, again, this isn't a movie, so that promo you heard was from an ABC showing of it back in the 70s or 80s, I believe. So, The Year Without a Santa Claus from 1974. Levi, what's the movie about?
Well, it's a stop-motion animated Christmas television special.
So
is it enough things?
That's a mouthful.
Yeah. By the Rankin-Bass Productions. It's based on Phyllis McGinley's 1956 book of the same name.
Yeah.
It's basically about Santa Claus gets a cold.
And during his one time a year, he has to do something.
And, yeah, really. They act like he's always busy. It's like, no, the elves are always busy. Yeah. That's what it is.
Yeah.
But anyway, and he's basically like, I don't know if I want to do it this year because he feels like people don't believe in the spirit of Christmas.
Yeah.
And so he's like, I ain't going to do it. And so then these other two elves, I guess they are Jingle and Jangle Bells.
Yeah.
Basically decide, we're going to kind of do it with the help of Mrs. Claus, who, voiced by Shirley Booth, who, straight up dresses as Santa Claus for a little while and is like, I'm just going to be Santa Claus. But, yeah, and then... But what happens is they go down... Well, actually, they don't decide they're going to be Santa Claus. I forgot. What it is they say, we got to go find somebody who will give him the Christmas spirit, as our old friend would say.
Yeah. Check out the Jingle All the Way episode.
And so they go to the South, of all places, the American South.
Dixieland, basically. Yeah.
And go look up some...
Dixie Town or
Dixie Crats. It's Dixie Town's what it's called.
Yeah.
Or what's it? No, it just says the Southern United States. South Town. That's what it was.
Okay. I thought... No, they sing a song that mentions Dixie in it, yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, and so they're like, let's go down there and find somebody. And so they do, and it's this little boy. Meanwhile, in the midst of all that, the I think is it Vixen that they go with? Yeah, with the Vixen they take down there and it gets sick, and that's all problem.
Yeah.
Then you have this whole issue that's going on with the snow and heat misers who basically compete. They're like brothers, I guess, and they compete over, I want it to be hot, I want it to be cold, and then there's Mother Nature who's presiding over all this randomly.
And I think it goes without saying the snow and heat miser are the most iconic aspects of this movie, the kind of biggest addition to the whole iconography of Christmas.
Yeah, right, and so that's pretty much what it's about, is trying to get Santa to care to do anything.
Yeah.
Which is funny.
I love that, and again, this is one of my favorite of the specials. I love that the title is kind of inherently provocative. The Year Without a Santa Claus.
Right.
But go ahead and to get to the end to spoil it. It turns out he makes it back in time. So
yeah,
actually,
he's in it the whole time almost.
Right. Yeah. So
he's just laying around.
But I remember the VHS cover for this growing up, how I used to watch it, and it's like this image of Santa laying in his bed, and it just like instantly in your head's like, oh no, like Santa's not making it this year. And even though I had like seen the movie, that one there, plenty of times, it just instantly just like, oh no, like something's different, something's amiss, even though in the end everything is fine, of course.
Yeah.
Again, this is a Rankin-Bass special, and again they produced a lot of the big specials that are familiar to a great many people all over the holiday season. They, along with, I think I mentioned this last week, Charlie Brown Christmas, have really like canonized in many ways like what the kind of family-friendly look of the holidays is all about for generations of children now. What to you about the Rankin-Bass specials makes them, pardon the pun, special, or something that are worthy of kind of rewatchability?
Yeah. Well, one thing I want to talk a little negatively about them first, which isn't even necessarily a negative, but I guess part of it is just that they're so outdated in the sense that it's like, let's just throw a bunch of songs at the screen, and puppets.
They're very mid-century TV in that way. Yeah.
And that's fine. I mean, I don't have any problem with that. But it's just like, if you think about now, obviously they would never make things like that. It would just be of a totally different nature. Although there are no new TV Christmas specials for the most part. They've all been canonized, and they do stuff every so often, every so many years, and then it disappears, essentially. It's like, oh, we got this thing. It's like, the last real thing that I can kind of remember that is still talked about is the Shrek Christmas thing. There's also the Toy Story Christmas, I think. But other than that, it's pretty much always been, it's just these things.
But, those are all tied to some IP,
right
outside of
but but the good news about these is that they're so good.
Yeah.
And even though there is, just they got the music and the whatever, and it's kind of... Now, this is not one of the better ones for music, I don't think.
Yeah,
there are other ones that are a lot better, I think. I mean, we laughed about it when we were listening to getting ready to talk about this, is that there's that moment where it's like, I dreamed unhappy things. Like, what?
Trying to make it sound upbeat.
Yeah, I don't know. And then they have this whole song about the South at one point or something. I mean, the songs in this aren't totally great. I mean, obviously the ones that are most memorable are the Snow and Heat Miser songs. Those are really easy to write, though. But I think, I mean, you have an example like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer has like some really great songs in it. Or even, I guess, if you're going to count Frosty the Snowman. But some of these kind of cheated anyway because they were already using existing songs.
Mm-hmm.
And this is different because it's like, they have to write these new songs,
Yeah.
But overall, I mean, other than that, this one is a pretty good one. But I think just in general, what works about these is just adapting these iconographies immediately and effectively to the screen.
Yeah.
And like I said, most of them was in the situation where it was just the songs that were being adapted to these famous things. Like, I mean, obviously Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Before that, had Return to Oz, I didn't know. Cricket on the Hearth, that's kind of a big thing. Little Drummer Boy, that's a song too. Not a good song.
Mm-hmm.
Frosty.
Frosty's
the
interesting
mad comedians.
Out of most of these, that's actually traditional animation, and a lot of the ones that people mostly remember are stop motion.
Yes, and then Santa Claus is Coming to Town. Also, that one's kind of the weirdest one because it's like
it's kind of a Santa origin story.
Yeah, it's like
also.
the song, but it's like about Santa.
Yeah,
I remember liking that one, but I haven't seen it in a long time. Here Comes Peter Cottontail. Now that one,
we watched that a decent amount growing up, and Vincent Price. That's probably one of the first times I really knew or recognized who he was.
That's some bat-ass crazy nonsense right there, because you've got Vincent Price's Iron Tail. What's weird about that one is it's like, I don't even remember what the plot of that is, but it's like basically functions as, let's talk about all the holidays, because then there's that whole sequence where, I don't know if you remember, there's like a whole section in that where there's a worm who is also like a French pilot who like flies an air balloon, hot air balloon or whatever, and they literally fly through all of the different seasons at one point, and you kind of see every. So that one's really interesting conceptually.
Yeah.
Willie Mays and the Say Hey Kid. Okay, we'll go look into this.
Willie James Huff. I don't know if they did one for him.
You know, obviously a guardian angel agrees to help Willie Mays in the National League.
Yeah,
pennant,
Willie Mays
obviously.
himself.
Yeah, because Willie Mays clearly needs help to win national titles.
I forgot he's still alive. Yeah.
Are you serious? He's got to be
he's like 90. He's
old as hell. Yeah, 91.
Yeah.
Wow.
I didn't know he was still alive.
But yeah, like Willie Mays needs help from a dadgum guardian angel. And then it kind of just petered out through the rest of the 70s.
Most of the ones are the ones from the 60s through the early 70s are the ones that most people
Frosty's
remember.
Winter Wonderland. Give me a break.
Now, Frosty's
Rudolph's Shiny New Year. Yeah, more like Rudolph's Shiny Butthole.
Frosty's Return. I know that's. I don't think that's something they did.
Well, of course, I forgot they did The Hobbit.
Yeah.
Nestor, the Long-Eared Christmas Donkey, which is one of my favorite songs. I've always laughed at this. Rudolph and Frosty's Christmas in July. Like, literally.
Crossover.
Wow. Jack Frost. That's kind of famous. Return of the King. They just skipped over everything else, I guess.
Well, there's also, I don't know
Christmas.
where it falls in the, I don't know where the Ralph Bakshi Lord of the Rings would have fell in the middle of all that somewhere.
That may have been connected somehow.
Yeah, I don't know.
The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus. I love also it's a special. It's not a TV show.
Well, it looks like the picture on Wikipedia looks like a Zelda video game or something.
Like if it looks like a Robot Chicken Zelda, like something. Now they did have some feature films I want to go through real quick. Willie McBean and His Magic Machine, the most 1965 sounding thing ever.
Yeah.
The Daydreamer, Mad Monster Party, which I've always wanted to see. I never have.
Yeah.
Boris Karloff's in that.
I love this next title.
The Wacky World of Mother Goose. The Last Unicorn, and our old friend The King and I, the 1999 version.
They did that.
I had no clue that they did, but yes.
Okay. Well, it says animated TV series. What's there?
Oh, I didn't even look at that. Okay. Oh, Lord. All right.
A lot of stuff that lasted for like
Pinocchio,
a year.
Tales of Wizard of Oz.
Whoa. Look, it says that Pinocchio, that went 130 episodes.
That's insane. The King Kong Show? What?
We got to check that out.
1966.
Never heard of
The
this.
Smokey Bear Show. The Tomfoolery Show. Yeah. The Jackson 5.
Wait.
Oh, they produced the Jackson 5. I didn't know that.
The Reluctant Dragon and Mr. Toad Show.
Wow. You know, the Jackson 5 show is probably inherently most, not episode-wise, but just inherent. Well, no, actually, Thundercats. Yeah, Thundercats was the most successful thing they ever did, as far as that
Again,
goes.
it has the most number of episodes other than the New Adventures of Pinocchio.
Yeah, but that Jackson 5 show would have been massive when it was
Yeah.
on, although it only lasted 23 episodes, so I don't know what's going on there.
Yeah.
But Festival of Family Classics. Anyway, yeah, they actually, The Ivory Ape, live-action production, 1980. Filmed in Bermuda.
Jack Palance.
Are you serious? Stephen Keats. Oh, Lord.
Oh, old friend.
Our old friend Stephen Keats, who was, of course, in Black Sunday and The Friends of Eddie Coyle and supposedly Death Wish, which I've never seen, but...
Yeah.
Okay, I'm leaving that up. The Ivory Ape. Oh, hang on. We got to talk about what? All right.
Don't worry. We'll get back to the year that was Santa Claus eventually.
Set in Bermuda, the movie focuses on a hunt for a rare albino gorilla recently captured in Africa by ruthless big game hunter Mark Kazarian, Jack Palance.
Mm-hmm.
Dedicated government agent Baxter Mapes. Are you serious? Baxter Mapes in The Ivory Ape? Wow. Stephen Keats. And his ex-girlfriend Lil Tyler, not to be confused with Liv Tyler, Cindy Pickett. I feel like I've heard that name. Nope, I have not. Conduct a humanitarian search for the ape, which has escaped from the greedy Kazarian, whatever. But hero and heroine are trying to fight. Now, heroine is in like hero, not as in like, you know,
I mean, it was 80,
are fighting against time as the villain has convinced the locals that the ape is a killer, must be brought in derelict. Wow. I hope this is on YouTube. I'm going to have to look it up later.
Yeah. There's probably all kinds of random weirdo TV stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
Sitting on YouTube.
Well, you got to think about there's all those like ABC Sunday night movies they used to make. Oh, my God.
Of them, yeah.
Like, I mean...
All the networks had their own TV
Yeah,
movies,
I mean, like, that's just such a thing that would never happen now. You know, I mean, like, you have examples of that. Like, the last few years they had... There was that one show that everybody said was really good, I remember, but it was, like, on ABC. and nobody really talks about it now, but it was like a mini-series show or like a movie kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, you don't really see that happen as much anymore. I'm going to see if I can find what that is. But anyway, back to...
I want to talk a little bit about one theory I have about why these, especially these stuff from the 60s endures and remains popular, is that by the mid-60s, color TVs were among their most ubiquitous yet, and most homes had a color TV set by the mid-60s. I mean, you see the explosion of things like Batman, of course, was a color show.
Yeah.
And I think for generations, not to make this all political or generational, but like for a generation or two of young kids, like really the baby boom generation and even Gen X a little later, like these things really represented like some of the first things that literally generations saw on television. And the whole novelty now, and our parents talk about it all the time, and I think we understand it intellectually, but like don't really truly understand it, is the access. You only saw these things once a year. Right. And if you missed it, even prior to VHS, well, you just missed it for the year. And so, you know, that was one of the reasons why one of the movies we're going to be talking about later, but also a movie like The Wizard of Oz and certain movies of the classic Hollywood era, King Kong, even Citizen Kane, when they came on, you had to catch it or watch it because you don't have the ease of access that we are very blessed to live with now. I can watch anything whenever I want, like literally on a whim last night. I'm like, I want to watch Barry Lyndon. Yeah. I'm going to do that, and just watched it. You know what I mean? And that ease of access is something that we, frankly, are very spoiled and privileged with now.
If you wanted to watch that movie back in like 1982, for some reason, other than it being good, Barry Lyndon.
Oh, yeah.
And you lived in Hudson, North Carolina, it's like, well, pack your bags and head on up to New York City, because that's the only, it's going to be in the repertory maybe somewhere. Yeah. You know, I don't know. But yeah.
Even then it wouldn't have been guaranteed, because there's all kinds of other things.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. It's like there'd have to be a specific reason then why Barry Lyndon would be playing somewhere. But I mean, obviously with VHS, but yeah, that's something that our moms talked a lot about, though, specifically with
She was
Frosty.
born in 1966, and so she was born around the time these were coming out, but of course in the 70s would have
but with them. Frosty, that she was like saying, oh, I watched every year and I cried when Frosty died, and at the end.
And I think Frosty's, I don't know, it's between that and Rudolph what I think the best is. I think as pure as like far as pure storytelling goes, Frosty is the superior one.
I think that's better for me, because
the production value of Rudolph, though, is very high, I think, and is
which
impressive.
Is not as clear with some of these other ones. But I don't know, I've talked about this before, but the whole Rudolph story, I think, is so disingenuous anyway, because it's literally like, oh, now we like you because you can help us out, but you were a freak before that.
I think it's got a good intention.
Yeah,
but
I'm saying I have a problem with the entire story, not even just that special. I think the special's really good, but I think the special makes it a little more worthwhile because it has time to go to the Island of Misfit Toys and show all these other toys that also are mistreated. But another thing also that's something that I talked a lot about in college with some people I knew was what an a-hole Santa Claus is in that. He's straight up evil, like, honestly. It's like, oh, well, he better get that figured out if he wants to ride on my sleigh team one day or whatever. It's just like... And then there's the scene where he, the nose falls off, and there's that trainer, and he's like...
Now, what I love, he's got like a hat, and then like a whistle.
Wow,
looks like a gym coach.
Yeah, it's like, why would a reindeer ever wear a hat? But, But yeah, and he's like, "What are you doing?" When he sees that. But no, I don't know. I mean, but that also does have like all these other characters like Yukon Cornelius or
Abominable Snowman
or Burl Ives narrating it, and there's just all these great things about
toys,
it, right? And the weird flying line that rolls over them.
Because I think it can sometimes be overstated, but at the same time, like, I think for generations of children who have disabilities or those who have some sort of, again, physical or mental or emotional disabilities, that the story of Rudolph mixed with the Island of Misfit Toys has to mean a lot. I know, to a lot of kids growing up who saw themselves as weird or different. Even Hermie in that, of course, which we joke and are not making fun of Hermie himself, but kind of thinking about it in the time, how queer-coded oftentimes that's looked at now, and how Hermie...
I want to be a dentist. Oh, and that is treated, and that is treated as something that is like
different,
like inherently
weird.
homosexual. Is like what it's like trying to implicate.
Why can't you be working class and tough?
Right. Then remember, there's that random like there's one in every Vietnam squad group. That one with like the glasses on elf.
Yeah, right.
And it's like literally if you look at every Vietnam movie ever made,
it's like the beat. Like,
right. It's like
elf.
if you ever watch any Vietnam movie ever made, you've got that one like that wears the glasses, and it's like he's that guy for them. Or
it's like we're saying, even though you got to have that one Na'vi avatar now wearing the glasses.
Yeah,
same thing.
Well, sunglasses, yeah, but right.
Sunglasses. Oh, you mean like clear glasses?
Yes, yes. No. I'm talking about. You remember? There's that one
I remember.
Right. No, not the
now.
Beats. No.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like I don't know. It's like every Vietnam movie you ever watch. It's like they got all the people, and then they got the one guy who wears these big black frame glasses.
Full Metal Jacket memorably has that. What's that guy's name in that? Tex or no?
Cowboy. Something.
Cowboy or What is it? I'm gonna look it up here real quick.
Yeah. Dallas, maybe. Can't remember.
It's something along those lines.
Anyway, he's got them.
Cowboys.
Cowboy.
Yeah. Private and then Sergeant Cowboy Evans.
But anyway,
we talk about the depiction of Santa in this a little bit.
Yeah.
Voiced, of course, by
Mickey Rooney.
Screen legend Mickey Rooney, which again we've talked about him in the past on here.
Pipe down back there.
But it is kind of crazy. It's like he's getting older now. Like that Mickey Rooney guy. Like remember when he was Andy Hardy? Like 30 years ago. Now he's kind of getting a little older. This would have been even after It's a Mad World. And it's just mind blowing that he still lived like another 40 plus years after this.
Excuse me. That's another thing.
I just noticed you yawned right after mentioning Mickey Rooney. Is there any connection there?
No, it's just
it's involuntary.
It's been a long day, but no, but that's the funny thing about this though too is with Santa Claus. It's like he's by far the biggest person to play Santa in any of these, obviously voice wise, and then he's like barely in it.
Yeah,
and it's almost like they wheeled him in on a slab or something, and we're like, they drugged him and brought him in, and we're like, all right, you got to do this. Shirley Booth was like, oh, I can get Mickey Rooney to do it, and he's like, I don't really want to. Yeah. They had already put his name on everything, so they had to knock him out and bring him in or something. And it's like he's barely conscious the whole time. It sounds like, but he's inherently the biggest, but yeah, it's like we said, it's like all these make Santa look like a total lazy a-hole, and then there's everyone else who has to react to him, except for like the Santa Claus is coming to town.
I was going to say he's more of a he's younger. He's more the main character of that.
He's got red hair in that.
Yeah. I do like that these movies are kind of looking at Santa askew a little bit, like off to the side. I mean, Santa even makes an appearance in animated form, and I feel like that's the most like quote good quote canonical Santa of a lot of these is him and Frosty.
Right.
Is he just kind of comes in at the very end.
Well, yeah, because that's what's funny is
his
first moment in it is literally the rabbit talking to him, and he's just nodding.
Yeah, it's like, he speaks rabbit. Yeah,
and it's like that's Santa's entrance, really. But but that of course, like with this, it's just strange though because he's like by far the biggest person to play Santa in any of these.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to talk a little bit about first of all, I guess Snow Miser and Heat Miser, and then in general Christmas villains and things, because there's a lot actually.
Well, we can talk about the Christmas villain in the next movie when we get to that too, because that's a very memorable, important one. Like I said, these are the most like memorable / merchandisable / new novelty items of this whole thing. And I think one of the things that's kept this movie frankly relevant over the years, while it is good, is the whole Snow and Heat Miser and this kind of dichotomy between the cold and the heat, but almost universally, and I'm part of this too, like everyone's preference for the Snow Miser. Just because his design.
Well, it's Dick Shawn.
Who we love.
Right, and there's like George S. Irving as the other guy who's been in a couple things as the Heat Miser.
I think Harvey Fierstein, though, played him in the live action version of this they did.
Oh, okay.
We can talk about that a little bit, too, just briefly.
Hang on, I'm looking here about George Irving. Yeah, he hasn't really been in a whole lot. Let me look.
There's the live action remake.
Yeah, in 2006.
Michael McKean played the Snow Miser, and Harvey Fierstein played the Heat Miser, which makes sense. But we love Michael McKean also.
Yeah.
But
John Goodman is Santa. Lame. Delta Burke randomly as Mrs. Claus. Ethan Slurpee or Soupley.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought at least said Slurpee for a second. I was like, what? Eddie Grit, what? Okay. That picture's Chris Kattan as Sparky. Billy Slaughter as Nerd Elf.
Okay.
Carol Kane, Mother Nature. Carol Kane, gosh, she's been in everything.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Love Harvey Fierstein and Independence Day, of course.
I
gotta call my mother. I gotta call my lawyer. Yeah, forget my lawyer.
My favorite part of him in that movie is when he's trapped in like the traffic and there's like that massive heat. There's this massive explosion and there's like the fire. Heat miser. Literally. Maybe that's how he became Heat Miser.
Yeah.
He literally.
He's gonna burn in.
Yeah, but he's like, oh crap. Which, have I ever told my crap story on here before?
You've told me plenty of times. I don't know. Yeah.
So, all right, this has been like
we don't sadly have an update to this.
This has been like almost a decade ago. So, like, I don't remember the exact year, but this probably would have been in like 2013, 2014, something like that. My dad and I went up to like a financial aid high school meeting at like the
Civic Center,
the J.E. Broyhill Civic Center up in Lenoir, North Carolina. Went up there to do that. They were talking about, you need to fill out the FAFSA for this year or whatever, or the coming year, not the one that said the year of that we were going.
Yeah.
There's this guy that was sitting right behind me. He was like this kind of pretty heavy set guy. He was quiet the rest of the time.
Mm-hmm.
But they said, you need to fill out the one for 2015, not 2014 or whatever. Real quiet, the guy says, oh, crap. Like he had already filled that one out, I guess.
And just the quiet terror that was going on with him.
Like the shudder in his voice was audible.
Yeah.
Oh, crap.
Sadly, we don't have an update. We don't know what's going on with him.
And like, I'm not even saying this to be like, it sounds randomly hostile and mean. That man might literally be dead now, for all I know. He was like an older guy.
Yeah.
Rest
in peace if you are.
Yeah.
See you in Radio Land when we get there.
TV Land.
Yeah. Anyway, Snow Miser and Heat Miser. But yeah, I mean, these I've got shirts of both of these guys separately, and again, it being Dick Shawn and like the whole little like.
Look at this picture of Dick Shawn.
Go look up Dick Shawn's Wikipedia page. The picture there.
Wow,
it's like him dignified, like looking.
It looks like a high school photograph or something like.
Have we ever talked about his death on here before?
No, so literally what I'm going to read it off what it says. All right, this is 1987. I'm surprised he lived that long. April 17th, 1987, he was at the University of California, San Diego's Manville Hall, suffered a heart attack and collapsed face down on the stage. Audience initially assumed it was part of his act. I guess that's just stuff he would do. But after he remained motionless on stage for several minutes, I love that's how long it went on, stagehand examined him and asked if a physician was present. After CPR had been initiated, the audience was asked to leave the auditorium. Most in attendance remained, still assuming he was part of Shawn's act, and only began leaving after paramedics arrived.
Wow.
A notice in the following day, San Diego Union newspaper announced Shawn had died during the performance at the age of 63. He was interred at Hillside Memorial Park, a Jewish cemetery in Culver City, California. And this says it all. Some guy named Jim... What? How do you say that name? Jim Knipfel claims that Andy Kaufman was inspired by Shawn. And literally, you read that story and you're like, yeah. Because Andy Kaufman, of course...
People thought he faked his death. Right. Or he joked about it over the years. And
so that may have been... I don't know. But anyway...
Again, we love Dick Shawn, so I'm not laughing at his death, of course, but just that, like...
I'm more laughing
if I was a comedian and I was like him, as far as his style of comedy, frankly, that's how I would want to die. You know what I mean?
He would think it's hilarious.
Right.
Like,
I mean, he would love it. And so I'm not laughing the fact that he died, but just that knowing that he would love that kind of thing.
No, but I love Dick Shawn. I mean, because he's great in particularly great, and it's a mad, 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 mad world, because I remember the first time I ever saw that.
His entrance in that. All time.
That is, if you have not seen
he literally just
that
drops
movie,
out of nowhere,
or it's literally the movie is going along, you feel like there's enough crazy people already.
Yeah.
And then the most literally no one entrance ever.
Yeah.
It's just like, what is this?
Yeah.
Literally the most shocking thing I ever saw at that point in my life. I was like, oh my God, what is this person?
Yeah.
And then, of course, him is Lorenzo St. Dubois, but his friends call him LSD in The Producers, which is also one of the great performances ever, as a hippie playing Hitler in a Broadway play. One of my favorite parts in that is when he first comes in, he's dressed like he is to the audition. He's like, "Is this the audition for Boomerang, baby?" Like, that's what he thinks it's going to be.
Yeah.
No, but Dick Shawn's great, and I mean, it's clearly Dick Shawn when you as the Snow Miser, obviously. When
if anything, you want more of him in the Heat Miser, and they're kind of the side.
Yeah, because they're actually kind of
at
the last 20 minutes of the whole thing. Anyway, they're not really in it a whole lot. Funny enough, of course, our first, the first time I ever saw any of this stuff was in Batman and Robin. When it's on TV, he's like, "Come on, sing,
louder, come on,
sing."
Yeah,
might as well drop that right here, actually. But yeah, that
just the image, you can't see it, of course, and you're listening to this, but of Arnold conducting,
and then it cuts to them, and they're sitting there froze, and they're reading singing from the But yeah, so just in general, I guess, about these villains and Christmas stuff. Now, of course, we have this. We have I invented chill, and
as we talked about
that's a far later version. But there's a lot of these Christmas movies that have these villains in them.
Usually juxtaposed against Santa Claus.
Right. Now, sometimes, and sometimes, okay, so the first version of that was the criminal justice system as a whole concept in Miracle on 34th Street.
Oh, right, yeah.
And
the
then,
original
of course,
movie.
right.
Yeah.
And then even with Home Alone, you got the robbers. Now, usually, though, it's themed. It's Jack Frost, or some imp, some strange creature,
a Mixapidlick-esque figure.
Right, yes. And in this case, it's the Snow Misers and Heat Misers. Of course, in this case, also, they come to an agreement to say, we'll do this and we'll do that, or whatever.
Yeah.
Then, of course, outside of this, you also have even the Scrooge concept, or the greedy old man, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mr.
Potter.
Version
of that.
It's a Wonderful Life, which we're going to talk about in a bit. Lionel Barrymore in that movie, by the way, just wow. But the Barrymores in general, just what a
still going
what
strong.
An era
Drew Barrymore still
what an era we had there,
Yeah.
John's death. Now that was its own whole story. John Barrymore's death. But I'm just laughing thinking about that. Sorry, and then I'm also laughing thinking about Drew Barrymore, just the way she lives her life and the way she speaks and acts.
Yeah.
But anyway,
but usually, they're these magical characters who are in the way that Santa uses his powers for good. They are trying to use them for their own ends. Usually, also, they're spoil sports. They don't care about Christmas. They don't like Christmas. They're not going to let Christmas interrupt their plans for whatever. Usually, in a lot of these, though, there's also this redemption of that character, of them coming to realize. I think the most legendary or an iconic version of this, of course, is the various versions of Ebenezer Scrooge, of course, the protagonist who's redeemed in the Christmas Carol,
right?
Throw it in here, another whole thing. You talk about Scott Fargus in Christmas Story.
Mm-hmm.
Now he's an impish looking person, but he's certainly not magical. But again, usually a lot of these characters, they're juxtaposed against Santa. They have some sort of magical powers. But by the end of it, they realize the error of their ways, and they, not to get too far ahead of this, one thing I really love about It's a Wonderful Life is that it doesn't try to redeem Potter.
No,
it's just like
and
it
doesn't have him die.
No, nothing happens to him.
It's just like no. Yeah.
He's just off screen and just not there.
Yeah. Also, I want to mention real quickly, I was thinking of the Scooby-Doo episode that is long forgotten, except for by me, called The Nutcracker Scoob, which came out in 1984. This was part of the new Scooby-Doo Mysteries show. Mm-hmm. But anyway, there was a section, the villain in that was the Ghost of Christmas Never. Looked like this. But also something that I always remember about that was the villain in that was named Winslow Nickleby. And there's a part where Mrs. Featherwig, a person in that, sounds like Nicholas Nickleby is what it's trying to be.
Yeah.
Well, there's a part where he's saying how much he's going to pay for the orphanage or the whatever's going on. What is it here going on? Let's see. All right. Oh, look at that. Yeah. The children's home. Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, and there's a part where he offers a certain amount of money, and it's not a whole lot. I can't remember if it's Mrs. Featherwig or one of the children's like, "That's chicken feed."
That's what that's from, yeah. You quote that all the time.
Yeah, but like, just like so over the top, "That's chicken feed." Anyway, that's what I always think of when I think of that. But the Ghost of Christmas Never. Just look at this.
What does that even mean?
I don't know. Basically, like Christmas doesn't happen right now. But yeah, so there's a whole plethora of these weird like versions of this. But that's something that's like its own. You know, it's strange because like as it's another version of that, of course, is the John Lithgow character in the Santa Claus the movie, which is like wow. What even is Dudley Moore in that movie exactly? Because it seems like he's kind of bad, but kind of not. Because originally he's like one of Santa's head elves, and then Santa's like, "You suck, get out." And he's like, "Oh well, now I'm gonna be bad. I'm gonna be Santa." Yeah. It's like, oh, but now you have to go to like this freakish, like weird John Lithgow character.
Yeah.
But anyway, but what's so weird though is like usually Christmas just as a whole concept is supposed to be this very positive, like, oh, okay, like, you know, whatever, we're just gonna, everybody loves each other, blah, blah, blah. But there's always this, I guess by nature of storytelling, there always has to be this, like, conflict that occurs.
Yeah.
And so it's strange that there's a random amount of villains associated with Christmas, which you normally think of with something like Halloween, but I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah, and it's weird, like, with something like, not Frosty, but Rudolph, is that, like, and what's the villain in that, by the way? Frosty. We can talk about him. He gets redeemed.
Oh gosh,
you know,
Professor Hinkle.
Yeah, he gets redeemed. You know,
busy, messy.
But in
who's your favorite soccer player? Messy.
In Rudolph, it's like the antagonist more so than anything.
Football player
is circumstances. Like, oh, the snow's bad. We gotta have, even though there is the abominable snowman, but that gets turned into a lower level
good
thing.
And of course, I mean, then there's people that are like making fun of him or saying like kind of everybody. He had the whole squad laughing on that one, if you know what I mean. Like everybody was kind of a villainous in that, except for the Misfit Toys and Hermie, and eventually everybody comes around. But it's kind of too, oh, now we like you.
Yeah,
you know. But yeah, the Frosty villain's my favorite one because he's just like, and that's the thing is like a lot of these are very sort of realistic versions of these things. Like you have somebody who's obsessed with money. Or it's like Judge Reinhold in like the Santa Claus, where it's like, oh, I'm the other dad. Or it's people that are robbing places. Or it's like these very basic human versions of these things. Then, though, like I'm saying, there's a random amount, though, of these mystical villains.
Which
is strange.
In Home
Alone...
Alone...
there's the Santa Claus robot in the Santa Claus 2.
Yeah.
Which is random.
Confounding.
But, right.
In Home Alone, we think the South Bend Shovel Slayer is going to be a villain, and he in of himself is, of course, revealed not to be.
Maybe he's just trying to be nice.
Yeah.
No way.
But, you know, that's like, oh, could be a Christmas villain, but of course, turns out not to be.
Maybe that's chicken feed. No way. Like, you know.
Yeah. We can talk, too, a little bit about you know, this it's
the
like,
animal shelter section of South.
So,
Town.
like, when is this set exactly? It's like turn of the century,
the early
1900s.
20th century, which is strange.
It's like 19-teens, hundreds or teens. It feels like. Maybe 20s.
It feels kind of like pre-war almost. It feels like
Pre-World
to
War
me. Yeah, it's almost the way that I imagine James Agee's A Death in the Family to look like, which is like early 1900s, pre-World War One.
Yeah,
like it feels very like, or like Thomas Wolfe novels or something. It feels very like, or Faulkner kind of like very all that like Southern writer aesthetic, like of like pre-World War One, like early 20th century aesthetic,
especially in the
which
South.
Which is so strange for like a Christmas special.
Well, it's also like to be watching this and okay, and then like not literally, but figuratively, hooray for Dixie, hooray! It's just like
please, sure, a bad heart, but which is like
good,
the
bad,
Civil
ugly,
War,
yeah.
In Texas or New Mexico, but filmed in Spain, but made by Italians,
right? And then dubbed all over.
But hooray for Dixie! Yeah, like there's General Sibley. He looks dead. Yeah, that's just such a strange touch, and you don't see that with many of these other because it's always in like some other world version of that, or like the Northeast, or like we're going to
old world Europe sometimes,
right? Or like the Burgermeister, and like all this like. Yeah, it's very strange to see it in like early 1900s, the South. Like, it's just weird.
And then it's almost a weird thing when you just to like see a special like this and to see the American flag in any context is like almost like it almost like orients it with a weird pseudo realism that you just don't at all like think about with these things.
And it's like it's weird because then it becomes both about Christmas and America, and it's just, but yet. In Dixie, which is still extremely, which at that point especially, but even still in the 70s, was still so pro-Confederate. It's just all very strange. Yeah. But like I said, especially in the early 1900s, that was still such a big, so pro-Confederate and so anti-Union, and obviously that was, later on. But, and then also with the reemergence of the Ku Klux Klan around that time, there's just a lot of random weirdness going on with that decision to make that at that time period. But anyway.
It is like, I don't want to get too political on this, but it is kind of poetic that this came out in 1974 because 1974 was effectively the year without a president. Of course, Nixon's resignation earlier.
Nixon was president, obviously.
Yeah.
He had a nose like a president. I mean, he had a nose like Santa Claus.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he had a nose like a president. Yeah, I guess he did since he was a president.
Well, he was a president who had a nose. So,
I guess out of that many, like.
But anyway, there is like a weird like. Again, I don't want to hit this too hard, but there is a weird ennui, the national mood aspect of this movie. We're not
into this whole government thing anymore. Yeah. We're not into Christmas. Yeah,
I mean there is a weird solemnness to what the country was in 1974 that this semi reflects, although it just kind of happy ending at the very end.
And they're like, we need to call up Dick Shaw and get him to be a weird snow imp. Like, it's just like, what? I mean, yeah. Well, also, it's just strange to me, and I think you're right about that, but it's just so strange and morbid that it's like, that like people's feeling and patriotism about the country is wrapped up in this like either secularism of Christmas or even outright spiritualism of Christmas of like, and it just is strange that like that has to be connected to America is just really weird to me.
Yeah,
especially for something that came out of the Middle East, which is or out of Europe in its own way too. But yeah, is so that's just very strange. Like I said, kind of mixing that with, like I said, the American flag being in this is random too, but
let's just go through just the song titles real quick.
All right, so Sleigh Ride,
instrumental. The title track.
My favorite, can I mention briefly one of my favorite details from anything ever is from the Jaws novel. There's a part where it's talking about where they were going to get a skiff. These two like kids were going to get a skiff and go out in the water and like basically do sort of like what they did in the movie where they take like a ham or something and like lure the shark with bait and like get it hooked on like a big meat hook or like a big fishing hook and said they were going to and drag him, and and it said in quotes, take him on a Nantucket sleigh ride is what they called it. But anyway, The Year Without a Santa Claus, of course. I Could Be Santa Claus. That's the Mrs. Claus song. I Believe in Santa Claus. It's gonna snow right here in Dixie. That's a song. It's gonna snow.
Oh well, that
right
reminds me
here
too.
in
Let's
Dixie.
talk a little bit about the kid who was in this. What was his name? Iggy. My name's Iggy.
Thistlewhite. Ignatius Iggy Thistlewhite, played by Colin Duffy.
But like,
of course, the Wee Winter Singers is the children's choir.
But like,
sounds like something that friggin' like Fred Willard would talk about, the Wee Winter Singers or something.
But Iggy is like, of course, the second most popular Iggy of the 70s. But outside of that, also, he's like this like hoodie, street ratty kind of kid, but comes from a perfectly good home, as it turns out.
Yeah.
But his whole voice also is not Southern in the least, you know.
Yeah.
But whatever.
We're like, hi, my name's Iggy, like, and it's not like, hey there, my name's Iggy, I live down here in the South, you know, and obviously if this is like a Tennessean vertion, it's going to be different than it would, you know, but still, it's not redneck enough, or not even just like, I say enough of, you know, but yeah, Ignatius. Iggy, ready. The Snow Miser song, the Heat Miser song.
Which are literally the same song, basically.
Same, yeah, exactly. Then, of course, they have Blue Christmas, the Elvis song.
Yeah.
But like a different version of it. Sleigh Ride instrumental. Here Comes Santa Claus. And then The Year Without Santa Claus.
Which we gotta, anytime that song comes up, we gotta mention, oh God!
Oh, and Rules Don't Apply.
Rules Don't Apply's use of it.
There's that moment in Rules Don't Apply where, like, for some, I don't even remember this because we haven't seen the movie since the theater, and
we were literally two other people, a couple that was in there.
We were that was probably the four people who saw it, literally. But the Warren Beatty Rules Don't Apply about Howard Hughes, which has been a totally forgotten film,
and it was a big deal. Like, oh, he's making a movie for the first time forever, and then he's yet again disappeared into the ether.
Right. But yeah, he made that, and that there's a moment in it where he's playing Howard Hughes also in the movie, and he's trying to like escape a hospital for some reason, and they put him on like a slab and are like rolling him out, and the soundtrack's like, "Here Comes Santa Claus." It's like a sped up version of "Here Comes Santa Claus,"
which really just appealed to us more than anything.
We just thought that was hilarious. That last thing I want to say about when the Year Without Santa Claus reprise was when he's like, I dreamed, what was it? He said again.
I dreamed unhappy.
Yeah, I dreamed unhappy things. Like,
it says it in a almost cheery
and
voice.
It's like, that's your lyric. Like, is I dreamed unhappy things with a smile pasted on your face.
In Yorba Belinda, California, Richard Milhouse Nixon is sitting there.
Yorba Belinda, yeah.
In 1974, like, you know, that picture of Nixon. Again, you can't see this, but he's just like this and looking. I wonder if he's just. That was him staring at the TV.
Do you remember those
watching
pictures of him like on a beach after that happened? It was him just kind of like walking around.
Yeah, it's like,
let me look that up.
Should have been in some fashion magazines, you know.
Yeah, it was weird. Like,
it was like wearing a suit.
Surfing in Nixon Land. Opinion. I'm gonna look that up later.
Who wrote that? I want to see.
David J. Morris.
I've heard
Sporting.
that name before.
I first moved to San Clemente. Okay, I don't even know what's going on there. Okay, no, there's a specific picture of him though that I'm not exactly finding of him walking, and it's like his back to the camera.
There's some famous ones of JFK look.
Yeah,
like that.
it shows that there. But it was like after Watergate had happened, more or less.
Yeah.
And what?
So it's not Richard Nixon, as it turns out.
There's a picture of a man doing a split in front of like
full color image, like,
and it says Alamy on it. Yeah. Anyway, but yeah, I want to actually see.
There's those people just like on vacation. It looks like and running
into Nixon with like his like old man coat on. You can tell.
Yeah.
Like I really want to see. You know what? Actually, I want to see a movie that is like Nixon hanging out in Yorba Belinda, basically surfer in chief.
Look at that one. You can tell he had that as his profile pic for a while.
Oh yeah, definitely. He was like, we'll do bar mitzvahs or something, kind of thing. Yeah, I want to see a movie about that though. Like,
you know what? He could have made good money. Like acting like, oh, I'm a Nixon impersonator.
But he was just Nixon.
But he just did a heightened version of what he did. And everybody's like, oh my God, you're so good.
Yeah,
and
he was like, I'm not going to lie. You know, and everybody was like, oh yeah, look. Yeah, but no, I want to see the Your Belinda movie now, like Nixon just hanging out, basically, and and surfing or doing whatever he did.
Yeah.
And maybe even maybe that should, you know what, that'd be a good, like, mini-series of, like, presidents after their presidency, like Lyndon Johnson, do one on him, do one on Nixon, Ford's entire life, you know.
JFK, we can't do it for.
Yeah. His head in the National Archives, just film that for a while.
Reagan bumping around the house looking for the jelly beans, you know.
Yeah,
like Alzheimer's
and like Nancy keeps talking to him. All he can say is "ready." Like, yeah.
They did screen ET in the White House.
James Buchanan, being the worst president ever, or just everything about that.
I think like while during the Lincoln presidency, which was of course immediately after his, he was like criticizing Lincoln left and right.
He's such a loser. He's literally the biggest lame duck ever. And I mean, and like Calvin Coolidge exists, okay, and like we're not even that level, Like literally, James Buchanan sucked so bad because among other problems that he just continued to not deal with, because even like somebody like Zachary Taylor, is it Zachary Taylor? Is that his name?
Yeah.
Like in the early 1850s, tried to deal with the California issue as like, okay, that's going to be a free state, or whatever, and like tried to kind of halfway deal with that. James Buchanan's like, I'm not going to deal with this whole slavery thing. Who cares if people are enslaved? As an attitude, really, that's what you're going for there.
And with that note, we conclude our discussion of the year without Santa Claus. About the failure of James Buchanan as a man.
He just sucks so bad. Like,
but again, we made fun of some things with this, but I find this to be
this is far better than James Buchanan's presidential track record. Let's just say
by far.
I mean, he was the president before Lincoln.
Yeah, and even better than that, you're going to hear the trailer for 1946's "It's a Wonderful Life."
Yes, it's wonderful news, for when all these wonderful people get into the swim, it's a wonderful life. For never before has any film contained such a full measure of the joy of living, the drama of living, and above all, the glorious romance that makes this such a wonderful life.
Don't you ever get tired of just reading about things?
Yeah. Hey, what are you doing tonight?
I don't want to get married to anybody, you understand? I want to do what I want to do. And you...
Anyway, sorry, I'm going to continue trolling James Buchanan.
Yeah, before we get to this classic film.
So...
When did he die, by the way?
Oh, first of all, he was the last born in the 18th century. That was what was wrong with him. When did he die?
Yeah.
Hang on.
Well, I had it up the top.
Oh, well, yeah, I was 1868.
So not even long after the Civil War.
Pennsylvania. Let's see. Let's go through his... let's just see what happens here.
Let's see what happens.
Well, first of all, the other thing that is interesting about him is he was never married.
Yeah.
Lifelong bachelor, probably because he just sucked.
Yeah.
But that, of course, led to questions of his sexual orientation.
So
historians and scholars often rank Buchanan as the worst president in American history. Yeah. We'll look more into this later, but yeah, he failed to reconcile the fractured Democratic Party amid the grudge against Stephen Douglas, leading to the election of Republican former So basically, that's another thing I forgot is that he basically got primaried and didn't even run for president in the
Democratic Party was split anyways in 1860.
But, yeah, that's just really bad.
Basically, Northern and Southern Democrats, but by then.
But yeah, you just and of course, I guess Bleeding Kansas, was that kind of going on a little bit before him or around that time?
1856,
and he basically didn't deal with that either.
Yeah, I mean, it continued through the 1850s. Yeah, those years he was president.
For as far as being president, he was not ready. All right, It's a Wonderful Life, which was released in 1946 to grand fanfare. Always interesting to think about post-World War II movies, and I think this is. Now, I have not seen The Best Years of Our Lives. I know you have. And
I've got things to say about this with this, too, because I went back and read a little bit of Mark Harris's book, Five Came Back, which talks about these things.
That movie, this movie, I know especially, is the most, other than probably that, the most patriotic post-World War II movie I can think of that never really talks about World War II or war all that much. It's very much about average people. Now, of course, it's a lot about his brother goes to war. That's a whole aspect of that. But it's also interesting to talk about that in the sense of Frank Capra, who, of course, like I said, was talks about N5 Came Back, worked pretty much for the War Department, making propaganda films.
It was mostly in D.C. during the whole duration.
But
whereas a lot of other big directors like John Ford, William Wyler, John Huston were out in the field making
George Stevens,
and propaganda films.
And so this was different for him because he was making actual, which was strange. Of course, well, not strange. He had already made movies like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, which was a clearly about politics, very American movie.
Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, also, which isn't talked about nearly as much as Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. I think I might prefer it, actually.
Right. And as far as fantasy movies go, he had already made Lost Horizon, and that in its own way is like a socio-political document, which is interesting. Some people call it the old chicken farm. They call it that part. That's chicken feed.
What I do,
but anyway.
One thing I really love about this movie, among many things, is how yoked in its time period it is, and it's very much a product of like 1946 America. You can even see the influence of like the fact that he made these propaganda films. I mean, the movie starts off almost like a propaganda film saying, here's where we are, here's who this man is. I mean, a lot of voiceover narration, literally, that would be like a lot of the propaganda films that had been made. Briefly, before we go into too much more of this, just briefly describe what the movie's about.
So, essentially, it's about a man named George Bailey who is on the brink of suicide. He's a family man, played by Jimmy Stewart, and he basically is someone who has always deferred his own dreams in the interest of his family's and his town's goodwill and interests. A totally, basically saintly figure. I can't think of many movies where there's someone is more of a just natural good person or saint in their own way, And basically, the whole conflict of the movie is that he's trying to keep the town somewhat independent of these basically a political machine or boss named Potter. What's his first name? Henry F. Potter. Who I say is essentially this kind of like political boss in a way, who like owns a lot of these like banks and loan lending organizations that basically lend out the houses to the people who live in the town, and he controls a lot of those neighborhoods where people live, and he's always raising rents, and it's like this does all this with a very heavy iron hand about how people are supposed to live in his properties and the rents he charges and all that stuff. And basically, George and the Bailey Savings and Loan are a lot more just and thoughtful and sympathetic to the people who actually take the loans. And so they're very popular on that, but they don't make a whole lot of money. And so the whole movie is essentially about him falling in love with this woman named Mary Hatch, played by Donna Reed. And kind of them trying to make somewhat, and they have a lot of kids, and trying to make a family out of their meager circumstances, and all the pressure that heightens over the years to the point where he's going to be led to suicide. And basically what happens is that an angel named Clarence, played by Henry Travers.
It was an
older
face,
Henry Travers, at
popular
this point,
face in old
especially in the
Hollywood.
30s.
Yeah.
He was in a lot more stuff. We
Shadow
talked
of a
about
Doubt,
him before in The
a lot.
Invisible Man.
Yeah.
We've talked about him. He was in Shadow of a Doubt. He's been in a lot of stuff. Was he in like Ball of Fire? Maybe.
I think he was. I think he's one of those men, older men. That's like a group
and
of
so he's the one who's kind of charged with talking him out of killing himself. And a way
he's
of doing
someone
that
who himself, by the way, has yet to get his wings.
Right.
So he's been there's a sense of wanting with that character too, in a little more of an unspoken way.
And so basically, George says, "I wish I was never born," and he shows him what life would be like if he hadn't have lived, and basically how bad the town would be, all the people that would have died, but that he saved from dying. The life situations that are worse because he didn't help him out money-wise, all these things that basically lead up to an incredibly powerful, I think, thematic statement of the worth of a life. And obviously not every person is George Bailey. Not everybody is this like saintly figure who makes all these changes that better the lives of everyone. But I think is a really great and really long-lasting statement on the power of the individual, but also in the community too, because I think this is a very socialist movie that a lot of people don't talk about, but I feel like that's very clear. That's what the movie is, but also about the power of the individual to make change, I think too, and so all of that to say it's also a Christmas movie. Randomly, most of it does not occur at Christmas. But that I think that's why I think it has remained so beloved is just the heartfeltness of it. I think touches pretty much everybody, I would think. I mean, I literally rewatched the Christmas with the Joker episode of Batman animated series today with the kids who were not really into that, by the way, all that much, but whatever. And they're wrong, so whatever, who cares? But that whole crux of that episode is about trying to watch It's a Wonderful Life on TV. Oh, but like the Joker keeps interrupting it, who somehow can always.
And I love too that Batman, Robin's trying to get Batman to watch it, and he's like, I've never seen that. I could never get past the title. Just so it's not a wonderful life, like for Bruce Wayne.
Anyway, it is, I think, by far the best Christmas movie ever made. By nature of it being,
it's one of the best films ever
made.
So,
it
goes beyond.
And
just
I really liked it
movie.
the first time, but seeing it again, it just really touched me on a whole other level that I hadn't even expected. I think also that it's just a really great movie and very well written, because it was written by
a host of
Francis Goodrich and Albert Hackett, and then Frank Capra also.
Dalton Trumbo even did a pass on the screenplay.
I didn't know that. Well.
And everybody'd
say, there's that socialist element, but
they all had. I want to go and talk a little bit about the production of this movie first before I get into what I really love about it, because there's a lot packed into that. So, Capra had again spent most of the war years working on the Why We Fight series, which was in many ways informational to the American public and helped raise a lot of war bond funds and whatnot to keep the war effort going. Again, a lot of other directors had been, like John Ford, George Stevens, William Wyler, John Huston, had been out in the field making various war documentaries and propaganda films. So this is his first film back in Hollywood, and before he had really got producing the Why We Fight series for the United States, he was already just in Hollywood becoming very agitated and aggravated by the amount of control the studios had. Mm-hmm. This was something that other filmmakers of the classic Hollywood period were really brushing up against anyways, because Frank Capra, and I mentioned this last week, he was, he's not exactly remembered this way, but for his era, he was in many ways the Steven Spielberg of his era in terms of highly successful. His movies won awards. His movies made a lot of money. And he was kind of saying, well, why do I have to take notes from Columbia? I want to be able to do what I want to do. And so this was the first of, very famously, this movie starts with the Liberty Bell. Mm-hmm. Or, this bell that I always think about, too, even the bells at the end that's in the Christmas with the Joker episode. Right. You see it on the screen that they're watching in Wayne Manor. But this was supposed to be the first of this big new studio that they were going to be distributing movies through RKO through, and he was wanting other big directors to join in with that. I think The Best Years of Our Lives may have even been one of those movies as well. Maybe not, I can't remember. But so Capra was really betting the bank on this, thinking, all right, this is my first movie back after getting caught up in its own machinery, that is the United States government making those movies. And so he was really like, okay, I'm going to finally really invest and do the type of picture that I've always wanted to make, and that in many ways is right in his wheelhouse. It's in concert with a great many of his other themes. And this movie was not a flop, but it basically broke even.
Yeah.
And it did not win the Academy Awards that he was expecting it to. It, in many ways, played second fiddle in 1946 and 1947 to The Best Years of Our Lives, which is one of those movies that I'm frankly shocked has ever been made, especially when it was made. And I like this movie even better than that. But in terms of the rawness and the honesty of making a movie like that when it came out, and even more shocking to me is that movie was more successful than this, because it's longer. It's like 3 hours long. But again, they were both
George
made.
Stevens made that, right?
That was William Wyler.
No, I'm sorry, William Wyler. I'm sorry.
They both had budgets of about $3 million. It's a Wonderful Life basically hit that. This movie made $23.7 million. Best Years of Our Lives actually made extremely way more money, and it won more Academy Awards. Also,
to the budgets, I assume that the budget was that high for It's a Wonderful Life because of a lot of special effects.
Yes.
There was more to that than there would have likely have been, I assume, in Best Years of Our Lives, but that also was longer.
Yeah.
So this isn't a totally short movie though either. It's north of 2 hours. I mean, it's like 2 hours 15 minutes.
The movie, so it was successful enough, critically, and again, film criticism in the 1940s is not what it would be some decades later.
Right.
But a lot of the critics even at the time are like, Capra's kind of being too sentimental now. We've kind of moved past that. Was kind of the idea of a lot of critics at the time, and a lot of them were patting a movie like The Best Years of Our Lives on the back, saying, "Oh wow, this is a more grown-up movie that's talking about the realities of coming home from war." And again, in 1946, I'm frankly shocked that the American public was not already kind of ready to move on from the war.
Yeah,
both military and civilians. That the war had been in the American public's face for the last 5 to 6 years, and the fact that they were still willing to go out, and this was in many ways the last. I mean, they made tons of World War II movies since then.
Yeah.
But the last of a certain era of that being the current day topic in many ways was that movie. And so this movie is in of itself a little bit of a disappointment. It forced Capra to kind of to go back and make movies for the studios. I think he only made 5 other movies. He never made anything again that was quite on the level or had the attention box office wise or critically of his movies from the 30s or this. And so in many ways it's kind of ended his career with a whimper.
Yeah.
Now, this isn't exactly the same, but a similar thing happened with The Wizard of Oz in comparison to Gone with the Wind when it came out, that Gone with the Wind made all the box office. It was more critically talked about, and again, film criticism even in the 30s standards was even behind what it was in the 40s, but won all the Academy Awards. Wizard of Oz was seen as a little bit of a tepid disappointment, and yet this, It's a Wonderful Life and Wizard of Oz, I was just talking about this with our friend Matt Williams just the other day when I was telling him we were doing It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah.
And he said this and confirmed what I kind of had thought anyways. Anecdotally, this is just one person, but that was the first, I think, black and white movie he said he ever saw or remember seeing as a kid growing up. And I think that's true for a great many people who see this. This movie, like a lot of other Capra works,
massively successful TV, staple.
Is very much a very big grand product of Americana. Capra was a master of crafting such stories anyways. And again, yes, on TV, it played. Again, it's one of those holiday movies that played every year.
Which is strangely had far more of a impact than like Michael Curtiz films like Yankee Doodle Dandy, or did he make Sergeant York? Michael Curtiz, or who was that?
Howard Hawks, I think.
Howard Hawks. I mean, but there were all those movies that were being made around that time that were a little bit either during the war or a little bit before.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And those movies are talked about somewhat, but not as much. Pride of the Yankees is another one, somewhat, I guess, of like it's a strange version of Americana in its own way.
And interestingly enough, also to talk about Jimmy Stewart's relationship to this movie.
Mimi in St. Louis is another kind of version of this too, because it's not as successful, but there's that.
That Henry Fonda was actually also up for maybe playing George Bailey. I think he would have been great for that as well. I think because he's another one of those actors that you just look at and you're, oh my God, Henry Fonda is literally like the embodiment of all the good things about America in a lot of ways. But Jimmy Stewart to play this role. Now, again, you think about the Jimmy Stewart of, say, the Philadelphia Story, which was a few years before this, is very light, very funny, but not necessarily someone who has a huge amount of depth to him as an actor necessarily in that earlier version of him. This has been written about a lot. The war really changed him in a lot of ways. He was a pilot during the war, actually participated in a lot of bombing missions and bombing runs, actually was fairly decorated for his war effort. And so this really begins the Jimmy Stewart that I think you and I often think of the 50s and through the 60s even to come. The Jimmy Stewart who worked with like Alfred Hitchcock and was in these Anthony Mann westerns that were more moody by nature, and even in some John Ford ones as well. That this is kind of a transitionary performance from him, while also embodying all the great things we love about like the small town kind of yokelly Jimmy Stewart, with the intensity of that scene of him at the diner in total absolute despair. That scene, frankly, you had never really seen many moments in a classic Hollywood movie of that kind of intensity of acting without a safety net. Now, in the end, we know that things work out well, but in that moment, the first time I saw that, I remember being taken aback thinking, I've never seen a moment like this in a classic Hollywood movie in terms of the rawness of the performance. And again, for it to be in this movie that it has this, quote, feel-good mentality, I think really this movie walks you to the edge of despair before, of course, pulling you back from it, which I think is the intensity of those emotions is what give this movie so much of its power.
Yeah, well, there's that sequence before that, too, of him yelling at his family. It's like right before that and being like mad at them. And that is unlike anything I've ever seen either, as far as the, that similar thing, as far as like, wow, he's really like, it's supposed to be the, in all these movies, the man of the house is
and
so
another
great.
Movie I want to mention that kind of comes close to dealing with suicide. This is a randomly pretty underrated movie. I think I really like it a lot. Is Meet John Doe, which is loosely the third and least talked about in the very loose trilogy of Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and then Meet John Doe. Gary Cooper plays two of those avatars in many ways, not Pandora related. And then, of course, Jimmy Stewart plays the one that's most iconic or most well known. Even mentioning also briefly Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, that Jimmy Stewart is a very idealistic, very in some ways naive, but naive in a way we want to look at that naivete and take it to heart, but it doesn't, again, have that quite the depth that Stewart will have years later. But towards the end of Meet John Doe, there's a moment where John Doe himself, played by, or Long John Willoughby, as I always love to say, played by Gary Cooper, and his best friend in that's Walter Brennan. Barbara Stanwyck's in it, literally all the best people, that he's about to actually commit suicide himself. And I had seen Meet John Doe after I had seen It's a Wonderful Life, and I remember thinking, oh, wow, that's like an earlier version of that. And again, you don't see a lot of movies, classic Hollywood movies certainly, that approach or put suicide at the forefront in that way, especially of this era. So a larger point I'd like to think about with this movie, and we can talk about its relation to history, is it's similar in some ways to Roaring Twenties. I know a movie that we both hold dear, is that it's like already contextualizing and looking back at the recent past. Obviously, this movie in many ways is about the 20s. it's about the 30s in the most direct way, I would say, and then the 40s leading up to, again, when it came out in 1946 in the post-war America. But what I really love about this movie is it already contextualizing the highs and lows of America. And already, Roaring Twenties is right as World War II is about to start, and this is at the other end of it. Already, this sense of the people of the time thinking and looking around and saying, we are living in incredible times, and not necessarily in the best ways either. I mean, times that are very consequential, times that will test men's souls, and certainly, Western civilization and Western democracy, by the point of It's a Wonderful Life, can take a deep breath and say, okay, we made it. There is something about, you see the clips in Roaring Twenties of like what the most recent thing was before it goes back, and kind of being like, where are we going to go from here? That's, again, on the eve of World War II. This is a movie that can only have been made by a victorious nation.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is that it approaches the despair and approaches death and looks death in the eye. And again, I don't think we really totally appreciate the America of 1945 and 1946's confrontations with death.
Yeah.
Both through our own citizens who lost their lives in the war, mixed with the realization of all the deaths across Europe and Asia, along with the deaths wrought by the atomic bombs.
Yeah.
Death was very much at the forefront of people's lives, people's conversations. They didn't want to talk about it. It's a matter of life and death. Powell and Pressburger movie, which we love, that also is in many ways part and parcel with these ideas. We could have easily done these two as a double feature, but
of this and what he's in.
It's a matter of life and death.
Oh, right,
and,
yes.
That's very much death is at the forefront and also involves supernatural elements.
Yeah.
And,
well, and if you look at that, the opposite of that, what you would see in Europe especially, I mean, German cinema basically was non-existent, really until the 50s again. I mean, it just seemed like nothing really came out of that. One movie I've always heard of called The Bridge by Bernard Wicki, or Vicky, I guess is how you'd say it, which came out in 1959, I know was like one of the first big German movies to be kind of anti-war against what the Nazis had kind of done. Also, in its own way, just the work of Alan Resnos, or how you say his name, of Night and Fog and Hiroshima Mon Amour, which was from a French perspective. But, I mean, if you're looking at these other perspectives from European or Asian perspective, even the Godzilla movies of, like, all of, like, these failing nations or at least extremely ravaged nations like France, as far as
I think the whole French New Wave and roundabout way comes about through that, like, sense of, like, liberated despair, which I feel like as long as we've been alive, and even decades before, has been the status quo French ennui.
Yeah.
Is that
and then
aesthetic,
also Rossellini and Italian neorealism and Bicycle Thieves. I mean, Bicycle Thieves is one of the biggest post-war movies as far as, like, just the utter despair of, like, I need a job. I literally cannot provide for my family.
I literally am desperate just for a bicycle to get myself to work.
That and the difference with all of America's movies post-war were so triumphant, but like you said, it was weird for a movie like this and The Best Years of Our Lives to be even somewhat thoughtful or critical of America.
Because I think in our heads we're like, well, we won, we don't need to look death in the eye anymore, let's move on. And again, both of these movies have an intensity of like, no, let's really think about what the last so many years of this country was, and as you said earlier,
and it feels like that could only actually have happened in the immediate, in its own way.
Yeah,
because afterwards it would have been a reaction to that of saying, no, we're going to do film noir now. That's what we're going to do, and then they moved on, and
which was happening simultaneously.
Right, but like, oh no, we're going to basically not care about anything that happened and move on. I feel like it only could have happened in that immediate, been ignored, and then revisited years later in its own way. But
as you said earlier about George Bailey, that he's someone who like is always about to do this one thing, and then these circumstances of his life, whether it be his father's, he had a stroke, I think it was in the movie, died sometime later, but and
like a few days, I think,
and then I'm going to take this big trip to Europe, and you think about like all the what ifs and the what would George's life been if he'd done this or that. That's very much in keeping with and a staple of looking at how this is in many ways inspired directly by A Christmas Carol.
Right.
In many ways, an update of that. And that's something that is just like the sweet special sauce in many ways of great storytelling is people's exploration of the crossroads of life, of thinking, well, we all have those things in our life where we're like, well, what if this had happened? Or what if I had been with this person? Or what if I had had this experience? And the whole what if is driving George Bailey to it's insanity.
And it's interesting, too, to think about the difference between that, because A Christmas Carol, I mean, ultimately, obviously, that's about Ebenezer Scrooge, who I find to be actually one of culture's top 5 most essential characters. Of just like, I know he's so iconic and everybody just knows, but there is so much to that story that I feel like we've just accepted and just put into culture where we don't think about it anymore.
Yeah.
But just the idea of someone who basically became bitter over life's problems, or that money didn't solve his problems, and that he just became
there was this unrequited love of him,
and that he just became the person he was, and that the ending of that story is him breaking out of that mold and becoming a good person. Whereas it's interesting that It's a Wonderful Life is all about someone who was constantly, incessantly good. And that's that kind of part towards the end where he becomes bitter and decides, I'm just going to kill myself, but then, of course, gets out of that at the end. But it's interesting that that's the difference between Scrooge and Bailey, is that he never lets it get him down until it's literally no way out, almost. Whereas Scrooge just, by nature of just being who he was over his whole life, nothing bad exactly inherently awful ever exactly happened to him. It was just this small trickle of disappointment, or small trickle of being given things and not working for them exactly, and then never appreciating what it was like to actually be alive, even like in his own way. You know, he literally was like a walking corpse.
That's one of the saddest things about the scene when Bailey comes home, and it's towards the maybe towards the end, and all of his kids and his wife are getting on his nerves. That's one of those rare scenes you can look at and see it from everybody's perspective in real time, because you're like George in the sense I just want to be quiet. I want everybody to hush up. But then they're just partaking in the yearly Christmas traditions. They're not being especially annoying or rude, or they're just being his family. And that's just one of those scenes you just see real life playing out on screen in a very direct way, in a way you don't necessarily see in a lot of classic Hollywood movies. That you just feel for everybody in that scene, and you kind of understand where everybody's coming from.
And it's strange that it took until the 50s with Nicholas Ray to make scenes like that again, and
it's certainly much more chaotic way than Capra would do.
With Bigger Than Life or Rebel Without a Cause, obviously. But it's weird that it took that for the 50s and the melodrama to really and Douglas Sirk movies too, I guess, but in a lesser extreme. But for movies to do that again, whereas he just did it naturally. He was like, no, this is just what
it's
is
almost
going on,
a shame, to yet again play alternate historian ever so briefly. It's almost a shame that Capra didn't lean into that moment in the 50s and do versions of those movies themselves. But that would have that medium of storytelling would have never occurred to Capra.
Well, and I think what is so effective about this in comparison, and I love melodramas in their own way. I love Nicholas Ray. I'm a Nicholas Ray fan, but it's not method.
Yes.
Stewart's not doing the method. He's just acting, and so it's very weird, and I think that's why it has remained so memorable and beloved, is that it is more realistic in its own way than the method would be, and of course the stuff before it. So it's kind of like you said, this and Best Years of Our Lives, which I haven't seen, but just knowing what the movie's about, just seem like impossibilities. It's just like, how did that ever happen?
And I think another thing that one thing that, again, is such a huge fan of classic Hollywood that, I would say miss. I was never alive during that time, obviously. But I really wish our own era had was the immediacy through which films came out and reflected the national mood. I mean, these movies,
it's taken us until now to deal with the Iraq War on screen with, the card counter or something like.
We've not even really, I don't think, fundamentally even began to touch, the Trump era and what that means in film. I mean, a movie like Joker, people made some semi-persuasive arguments were in its own way about that. But I mean, we just don't have that immediacy
even
that those
Vice,
movies do.
which was in its own way about that, was ultimately more about the war on terror and the
Yeah.
Iraq War, and that's way more what that was actually about. Even though people tried to link it to that, and even though in his own way, Adam McKay tried to link it to that. But yeah, like I said, in the way that they just put movies out, I mean, I want to go back because we were mentioning it earlier. Just the names for this movie, writers: Dalton Trumbo, Clifford Odets, Mark Connolly, who kind of was a sort of like Clifford Odets in a way, worked on it sort of, and then RKO shelved it, and the RKO didn't make it. And then you had, I said the other people who wrote it, but also Francis Goodrich and Albert Hackett, and then Joe Swirling, who wrote on a lot of stuff, but particularly Gone with the Wind, he was uncredited. That movie, The Whole Town's Talking, the John Ford movie, Edward G. Robinson movie.
Which we like.
Yeah, just a lot of random stuff. And then also Dorothy Parker, of all people, brought in to polish the script because Dorothy Parker.
I mean, this is one of those examples of you have enough great people circle something, they're going to, even though Capra ultimately has final say, there's just going to be enough goodwill and pixie dust spread around that something special is going to come out of it. It's, along with Stewart, we haven't said anything really about Donna Reed, but she's really great as his wife in this. Just all these very talented people at the top of their games. And again, this meant a lot for Stewart and Capra, most in particular, because they had been serving in the war, so this was a re-entrance for them into Hollywood yet again.
Right. And it's just strange when you think about all these names and all these people running around in this production. And yet you go now to movies and you see written by, and it's like blank and. Oh, you're talking
about like big blockbusters.
And like all these names, and they suck so bad. And it's just like, you say it all the time, and I know I am quite a fan of classic Hollywood. I mean, I complain though a lot about its the staleness of its production, that they're just putting out movies. But that even still, you get people to just, you're working on that this weekend. Go do it.
There was a sense of professionalism,
and it's just
that was
like,
there,
and they did it, and they turned it in. Now it's also why these people died younger and were alcoholics, and and it's like because they literally lived on the edge all the time. But at the same time, we're not getting movies like that anymore. I mean, and like, we're not getting anything like that, because, and especially when, like I said, you see all these names, like you see Chloe Zhao and whoever, and Chloe Zhao. When you get to that point and you see all those names, and we're not, and this is not me picking on Chloe Zhao, by the way, who makes great movies by all accounts that I've seen, but that there's just seriously something wrong with movies when that's the issue, and then you have all these names who are all very different people. We have very different ideas about.
But that, in many ways, was a reflection of this particular period in Hollywood in the 40s, where a lot of highbrow intellectual types were slumming it with
Faulkner
movies.
And Odets and Vidal and Christopher Isherwood and James Agee and and all these like writers that moved to Dorothy Parker, even like I said, or F. Scott Fitzgerald. All these people that were moving out to Hollywood because they're all, I want to make some money because I'm trying to do these big novels and I'm not making any money off that. And that they showed this clear either distaste, or Eugene O'Neill, did he do that any?
Not really, no. Okay. There were some of his plays that were made into movies.
Right, but I didn't think so, but I wasn't sure. But that all these people had either an outward
from
disgust
everything I've ever read,
movies,
he was about the most prolific, proficient, dangerous drunk among them that I've heard. I mean, I don't think Faulkner was particularly violent, but he was pretty bad.
He was a bad alcoholic, But I mean, and that's the thing is, like you said, people like Faulkner or Odets that have these and all that. Clifford Odets inspiring Barton Fink obviously is a big part of that too. But that whole movie's about all these things because of Where's My Honey and all that. That the whole John Mahoney character in that is basically a Faulkner type. But which one I always have to bring this up whenever it gets brought up, is that he's like, isn't that writing just nice? And Barton's like,
he finds it to be this despairing.
I've always found it to be come out of a great pain or whatever.
Like this labor,
and he's just like, I just like making things up. Like, it's just so hilarious. But but anyway, but all these people that have this clear distaste with Hollywood, Gore Vidal especially. I mean, his entire career, Gore Vidal talked about how much he hated Hollywood. And strangely, he was a student of like early 20s Hollywood, like because he wrote a whole novel about it called Hollywood. But of that Rudolph Valentino, Fatty Arbuckle era.
It's very striking to me
that
on that famous Vidal Mailer Dick Cavett appearance where beforehand Mailer had butted.
I love that happened beforehand. Then they go out and do all that.
One of the few things that shuts everybody up, and everybody of those four people. Well, I can't remember that woman that was with him, but
she was like an author, I think. Too,
is like that they all agree Charlie Chaplin was a genius. That's the only thing that they all will go, okay, like that. That just speaks to Chaplin's power with all those people, and generationally too for all those people. What Chaplin meant,
but that with Vidal and those types that they showed this clear distaste with cinema. But then you even get stuff like this where you get people like Odette's writing on this, or James Agee wrote on like the African Queen, which he might have liked movies a little more, but these people who are clearly these literary or playwright types that are like, oh yeah, I'll do that, and then they do this.
And we're mostly talking about writers, but there's a lot of directors who thought this way too. John Ford was among those or Howard Hawks, that even Capra. These were the first really big generation of movie professionals. Perhaps, and again, this is a strange thing to say, now we live in a world where we've been raised by movies for multiple generations. This was being made by professionals who saw it less as an art than as that entertainment aspect. And strangely, that made for better works. Yeah. Which I think is strange, because you would think, well, people who maybe have a tradition of watching movies and being cinephiles would maybe make better films in the long run, but strangely the opposite's the case.
Right. I want to mention real quick, I'm just reading here about the Francis Goodrich and Albert Hackett, who ultimately got the screenplay credit along with Capra.
Yeah.
They said that, this is what they said, said it was not a harmonious collaboration. Goodrich called Capra that horrid man and recalled he couldn't wait to get writing it himself. Her husband, Albert Hackett, said, we told him what we were going to do, and he said, that sounds fine. We were trying to move the story along and work it out, and then somebody told us that Capra and Joe Swirling were working on it together, and that sort of took the guts out of it. Joe Swirling was a very close friend of ours, and when we heard he was doing it, we felt rather bad about it. We were getting near the end, and word came that Capra wanted to know how soon we'd be finished. So my wife said, we're finished right now. We quickly wrote the last scene, and we never saw him again after that. He was a very, very arrogant SOB.
That's the Harris book quoted.
Right, but yeah, and yet this movie came out of all that. Like I said, it was just fascinating to me. But
other than what we've said, what's the lasting appeal of this movie? Why has this movie endured over nearly 80 years now?
Like I said, it's weird because I think there's a whole inherently socialist message to this, and of course there's a part of that is the whole bank run phenomenon that's in the movie, the kind of the depression, but also just this very grassroots fact. And I mean, this was the case also in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, that people claim, a lot of conservatives especially, claim to be very grassroots, this very down home, like I'm eating cornbread on the Senate floor kind of like attitude, right?
Yeah.
But yet then they never vote that way, right? It's always, oh no, I want to go for the businessmen and the whatever. And that's strange,
due to this implicit desire that they want to be them, or
yes,
they think they can be them.
There are people that I know in our life, and I'm not going to name, who are big fans of this movie, who are big conservatives. And it's like, what are you missing here? There's kind of a whole aspect you're missing to this, which is that this Potter guy, played by Lionel Barrymore, who I haven't mentioned, who's really great as a villain, and like I said, Barrymores are always great anyway. But
he's also really great in Key Largo. He's
that's right, I forgot. He's the old man in that. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I forgot about that. That would have been right after
47, I think, maybe.
But yeah, that's clearly that's a very Trumpian like character and figure, and
48.
Or any type of that person. I mean, you could come up with any, like I said, version of that, and it would, but of that person. But that I mean, it's a very socialist movie in the sense that it's like, no, we all need to help out each other. And literally, the movie is solved by, at the end, everyone saying, no, I've got enough money to help you out. Literally.
After he had put his own money on the line to
for all
make
of
sure
them.
the bank stays
and
open
so
during the
that,
bank
I think, appeals to people on this very sympathetic level. It's just, I think it's a shame that people don't always act that out. Because it's always a very idealized version of what Christmas is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is what, I mean, and that ultimately, I think, why is because people appeal to this, is that Christmas is ultimately about that. It's not about, well, it's about Jesus, but but that is a whole Christian.
And this does have a spiritual message.
That is a whole
it.
spiritual or Christian aspect to this, is that people are wanting to help each other out in this very basic way. And so I think that's what has continued to appeal to me. It's also just very funny. As dark as it gets at the end, it's very witty. It's constantly engaging, I think, and very poetic. I mean, I talked about last time about that whole scene where they're throwing the rocks at the house and they're saying, we want to get this house someday, and then that happens to be the house they eventually buy.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot of poetry in the movie that appeals to people too, in this romanticism that people don't normally admit to loving but actually do. I think that I said that the melodrama would kind of, I use the word pervert, but I don't mean that in a bad way exactly, pervert into this more angsty version of that, I think, later on. But
my final thought on this is I think ultimately, in many ways, you hit what I was going to say in a version of it. The reason this movie endures is because it's thoughtfully optimistic.
Yes.
It's not blindly optimistic.
No.
It's very easy, and this was, again, a lot of movies I love from the 40s onward. The Humphrey Bogart screen presence was in vogue in the 40s.
Mm-hmm.
The cynical, like, in Casablanca a few years before is a version of this, like the cynical, I don't know if I'm going to do the right thing. I might not do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe by the end I'll do the right thing, but again, film noir was in vogue during this time. And
right.
I love a lot of film noir,
yeah.
so I'm not necessarily totally doing that. You know what's way harder is to depict goodness on screen.
Mm-hmm.
Part of what you said earlier about the whole arc of this movie is a very, I don't think oftentimes remarked enough, a very tricky tightrope, which is we're going to take a great man, we're going to put him through the fire, through the ringer, through hell, we're going to test him, and he's actually going to come out the other side better because of it. And I think the natural tendency during this time would have done, again, I love Rick from Casablanca, but that's a very 40s character in terms of cynical. I have my own ethics, but I'm not going to stick my neck out for nobody, as he says in the movie.
I stick my neck out for nobody.
But then maybe by the end, okay, I'll actually put it on the line for this person. No, like George Bailey as a character is one who was good from the very beginning, and it's basically testing him, tempting him. Will he be good by the end of this?
Yeah.
And the answer is yes, but again, it's thoughtful. It's not naive. It's very considered. It's very real. It's very raw. It's very honest. But in the end, he makes the right decision. He decides to live, and as a result of that, he is welcomed by his family, by his community, by the ones he loves, in terms of a gratitude that is very... It's as needed now as it was in 1946. And I think that's one of those things that will make this movie age into the thousands of years from now, is that sense of decency and honesty that it has, is one that, again, I'm very fortunate for this movie, for existing, for having that sense of hope and that sense of message, by, again, not being naive about it, because you can see a lot of crappy, cynical Christmas movies and go, well, they didn't earn this ending.
Right.
This very much is something that does.
And the ending isn't a solve all problems ending either, because it's like, it's not even that Potter is vanquished, or that they're moving into a new house. Well, it is kind of like, they're going to give a lot of money to the savings and loan. His friend, that's always, what does that friend always do?
Hee-haw!
Or whatever, yeah. Like, that is kind of an ending where it's like, okay, a lot of the problems are solved. But it's not even exactly like, oh, everything's great. It's just that we got through this moment to recognize that life is enough.
Right.
And that it's, even in those worse,
and in the crossroads ahead, George Bailey will always remember this moment where the whole community stepped up for him, and that, no matter what lies ahead, that will always be a victory in a moment that he'll remember and will say, you know what, I am loved by all those that I love.
Yeah, and it's not even that he was always wanting them to notice exactly. That wasn't why he was doing it, but the fact that they did, I think, spoke a lot to him, obviously, in that. So
again, the best Christmas movie ever, I think kind of unambiguously to me. I mean, there's we love like Home Alone and some other ones, and that I think that's of a high caliber, above average caliber, but this is, again, not only the best Christmas movie, one of the great movies in any era. So, that's It's a Wonderful Life.
That's it for that, and James Buchanan.
But,
forgot about him. But.
Jeff Probst, what have we got next week?
Stay tuned for scenes from our next episode.
You expecting somebody?
Yes.
Oh, Your Excellency, we've been expecting you. As chairwoman of the reception committee, I extend the good wishes of every man, woman, and child of Fredonia.
Never mind that stuff. Take a card.
Card? What'll I do with the card?
You can keep it. I've got 51 left. Now, what were you saying?
As chairwoman of the reception committee, I welcome you with open arms.
Is that so? How late do you stay open?
I've sponsored your appointment because I feel you are the most able statesman in all Fredonia.
Well, that covers a lot of ground. Say, you cover a lot of ground yourself. You better beat it. I hear they're going to tear you down and put up an office building where you're standing. You can leave in a taxi. If you can't get a taxi, you can leave in a huff. If that's too soon, you can leave in a minute and a huff. You know, you haven't stopped talking since I came here. You must have been vaccinated with a phonograph needle.
The future of Fredonia rests on you. Promise me you'll follow in the footsteps of my husband.
How do you like that? I haven't been on the job 5 minutes, and already she's making advances to me. Not that I care, but where is your husband?
Why, he's dead.
I'll bet he's just using that as an excuse.
I was with him till the very end.
No wonder he passed away.
I held him in my arms and kissed him.
Oh, I see. Then it was murder. Will you marry me? Did he leave you any money? Answer the second question first.
He left me his entire fortune.
Is that so? Can't you see what I'm trying to tell you? I love you.
Oh, Your Excellency.
You're not so bad yourself.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, thank you all for coming. Drive home safely, everyone. Thank you for coming.
It was on that night Carl met his destiny, and I met mine, almost. They say when you meet the love of your life, time stops. And that's true. What they don't tell you is that once time starts again, it moves extra fast to catch up.
And those clips you just heard were from, of course, 1933's Duck Soup and 2003's Big Fish. This has to be one of the bigger year differentials we've had yet of the double features, I would think. 70-year difference. Duck Soup will be our very first discussion of the Marx Brothers, who we're both huge fans of. Duck Soup, in many ways, represents their kind of most, I don't know if popular exactly, but the one that, like, when you end up reading greatest films of all time list, usually Duck Soup's the one that's picked to be on that list. Why do you think that is, and what to use the appeal of the Marx Brothers?
Well, they're just so funny. I mean, they're very witty.
That's important in comedy.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't know. There's just a wittiness to that, and you can feel there's a camaraderie and a practiced nature to them actually being brothers. The Three Stooges is just dumb.
Well,
like,
it should be said, like, all the comedy duos or
Right.
teams of the 30s and 40s from, like, we're not really seeing that much Laurel and Hardy.
No, but I'm sure they're pretty funny, I would think.
Abbott and Costello,
They
the Three
suck.
Stooges,
Sorry,
Marx Brothers.
I kid you not, I literally farted. I don't know if anybody could hear it. That literally, when we said Abbott and Costello, I farted.
I'm sure spiritually they heard.
Suck. They suck.
But when you just look at the Marx Brothers in comparison to all those people, they're just top of the heap.
Yeah, and Three Stooges is dumb, but I don't get mad at it exactly. But like Abbott and Costello, I think is genuinely bad. Like, I don't like that.
Yeah.
Marx Brothers, though, I really love, and I think it's just there's a versatility also to their personalities.
Well, all three of the main ones, which of course are Groucho, Chico, and Harpo, they all have their own distinct lane.
Right.
They work really awesome together, but also the movie's like, all right, there's going to be a Harpo scene, there's going to be a Chico scene, there's going to be a Groucho scene, and of course they go intermingle, but they all have their specific thing they're really great at, and just seeing how that coordinates within these plots, which are pretty, the plots are pretty basic, but it just allows them to run right, literally and figuratively in that. I mean, that clip you just heard is just Groucho in pure Groucho mode, just a mile a minute, has a comment for everything.
Was that the scene? No, there's another scene in that movie where he's like, I can see you right now bending over a hot stove, but I can't see the stove.
Yeah. And like how, a lot of that is obviously scripted for the movie, but just to see other appearances of Groucho, you just know that's who he is.
And I think that's another thing I like about it is it's a little less physical comedy. It's a lot more, at least for Chico and Harpo, it's a little more physical.
Well, Chico's kind of in the middle.
Right, he can kind of do both, and Groucho's way more dialogue and
Harpo's
verbal,
pure physical comedy.
And you've always said he's like chaotic evil all the time. It's just
I think Harpo Marx is not so secretly in cinema history one of the most evil presidents.
Yeah,
I say that kind of jokingly, but he is literally one of the most mean, vindictive people with a smile on his face too, which makes it even more mean.
And in Duck Soup, which everybody kind of thinks of as like, I don't necessarily think it's exactly their bet.
That's what I was saying earlier. I feel like, to me, Night at the Opera has the biggest highs, but also has some things that you're like,
because Duck Soup doesn't have to be belabored by, this couple they're helping out, or this thing. Like Duck Soup,
just literally pure anarchy.
Well, that's what's funny is the whole movie acts like it has a definitive structure, and then literally the last 15 minutes is just nonsense. Like literally, I don't even know what happens in that. Like,
I couldn't summarize it for you right now.
No, it's literally like every war combined, basically, and it's just like one of my favorite moments in that is when it's supposed to be the American Revolution, I guess, and it's like 1 by land and 2 by sea, and they look and it's like 3 lights, and he's like, they double crossed me. Like, it's like, just stuff like that that's so random, and horses sleeping in beds and stuff. It's just like nonsense. I mean, but yeah, that one scene, I think actually one of my favorite scenes in the whole Marx Brothers canon, other than maybe the contract scene or the cruise ship room scene in the Night at the Opera. Both those are great. Is that scene in this movie in Duck Soup where there's that guy that's selling peanuts, and they keep messing with him or whatever, and it's just so weird. Harpo keeps just putting his leg up on his arm.
Yeah, right.
And it's just like stuff like that is just like so weird.
Yeah.
And it's not like the Three Stooges where it's like, I'm going to knock you on the noggin. Like, you know, just stupidity. Like,
yeah.
There's a clear intentional weirdness to everything that happens that is so unlike anything else of the time, or I wouldn't say totally unlike anything else afterward because of how influential it was.
Yeah.
But that's what I also always preferred about the Looney Tunes, because it was kind of more like the Marx Brothers, where it had physical comedy, but it had somebody like Bugs Bunny, who's clearly like a Groucho analog, and then something like Tom and Jerry is just like the Three Stooges, just stupid, running around, hitting each other the whole time, you know. And so there is that whole strand of comedy that exists, I think, in both. That something randomly like Dumb and Dumber, I feel like, is more of a Marx Brothers-esque version of that, where it's a lot of like dialogue heavy comedy, but then also like he's going to take a big old dump in that toilet bowl, you know, and it's just like, not that the Marx Brothers was ever that much, but another thing also about them that is we're kind of frustrated by sometimes is the whole, it's very vaudevillian aspects of their whole
which is where they come
act
from.
Because there's Harpo, oh, he's going to play his harp, and I'm like, I literally don't care about that at all.
But
But
there's Zeppo.
And then there's Zeppo.
Yeah, that's all of his storylines, and I understand why they think they need that.
Yeah,
because they're like, well,
and
we
this
need
is
something.
one of the few movies he's in too, by the way, the Duck Soup, because he's in a couple other early ones, and then he's not in them anymore.
Might be in Horse Feathers too, I think.
That and like the Coconuts and Monkey Business, maybe. But like, or Animal Crackers, I can't remember. I think it's Animal Crackers he's in, but yeah. Like, he's not in a whole lot of them. But anyway, about him, you were saying.
Well, just that I feel like they're like, well, we need to have something that, like, it's like, you know, it's for the Midwest.
We need to go down and bring joy to the masses.
Yeah,
so, like,
you know, and it's like, and I think
like,
that, you know, they were so far ahead of their time in a lot of ways, but that was one way it's like, no, you could have went without that and still been awesome, but I understand the impulse to do that.
Yeah.
So that's Duck Soup.
Yeah, but we're big fans of Duck Soup,
Yes,
and so we're really going to like talking about
Marx
that.
Brothers
and
as
literally
well.
just go through every scene and laugh at everything. But yeah,
Big Fish from 2003. Now, we've already done 2 Tim Burton movies, I think, you know, with Planet of the Apes remake and Beetlejuice. So we're already creeping up on our Tim Burton numbers. I don't know where everybody stands in terms of directors that have been the most represented. This is a strange one in the sense of I've seen this movie a few times, more than you, but not very often. But this represents really the last, like, just kind of unambiguously pretty good movie Tim Burton made, which we're going on 20 years now, and that's sad. I mean, the fact that Frankenweenie's like, it wasn't dog crap. It's just like, you know, just like that, like it's just like that in itself.
It wasn't a Frankenweenie, like maybe, like.
But I mean, I think that this is like a pretty good movie, and it's a movie that's kind of sort of atypical for Burton, but also fits into a lot of Burton qualities.
Yeah.
In many ways, it's like it's the Gothic Forrest Gump. Because the subject matter is about a guy who tells a lot of tall tales, except it has the whole framing device of that man is now like a grandfather. He's at the end of his life, and Billy Crudup plays the kind of his younger son, and Albert Finney plays the older.
It's like a good version of Princess Bride.
Yeah,
which of course involved Peter. Excuse me, not Peter Finch.
Peter Mayhew. No.
What's his friggin' name?
Peter Cottontail.
Columbo.
Oh, Peter Falk.
Peter Falk. Yeah, I was close. Okay. Peter Falk, who we love. I clearly love Peter Falk, but can't remember his name.
Yeah.
No, I do. I'm a massive Peter Falk fan. But yeah, that he's in that, like the old guy telling the story. He's like, you want to hear this? You want to hear this story? Yeah. I'm going to tell you this story to help you go to bed.
Yeah.
Like, you know, it's just like, okay. But that sounds like a far more genuine, like, because that obviously doesn't have anything to do with him. He's just telling the story. That whole movie's just stupid anyway.
That movie, Big Fish, came after, I think, the death of Tim Burton's father, who he also had a strained relationship with. He was, Tim Burton, you don't have to know much about him to know he was the weird, goofy artist kid. And his dad, I think, wanted him to do something more practical.
And of course, he once said that Jack Palance was the weirdest person he've ever worked with. And if Tim Burton's saying that, then yeah. But anyway.
And so I think they had a bit of a strained relationship, but he had some kind of long-term illness. I don't know if it was cancer or what it was, and died. And So there's a lot poured into that movie. It's not autobiographical in the way that the Fabelmans was, we talked about earlier, but it
or
is
even
just...
that Magnolia kind of was like that, too, as far as PTA.
Which the ironic thing about Magnolia, which I won't say much, but who knows? Stay tuned on that one with a very unlikely pairing. Forget I said that. Forget it. Prank caller.
You need to sober up.
Is that PTA actually had a great relationship with his father that wasn't strained. He was a TV producer, though.
Yes.
Or, he voiced...
I was just thinking around that was kind of sort of around the same time as that.
Around
it was kind of interesting, but yeah.
And so... what I really love about it is it's Tim Burton ever so slightly out of his comfort zone. It is like kind of it's fantasy. It does, not high fantasy, but it's a low fantasy. It's got a great Danny Elfman score, which even in the clip we played is a very Danny Elfman piece of music. But Ewan McGregor, we've always liked him a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of him in this movie. He plays that like young, devil may care attitude who's willing to get into whatever misadventures.
This, I guess, would have been a little bit after La Maison Rouge, or what's it called?
Moulin Rouge.
Moulin Rouge.
Yeah. A little after that. It would have been in the midst of the prequels would have been coming out.
I say that, and I'm like, I've seen that movie. I don't remember.
But it's just a very, it's not the most remarkable movie ever, but I think it is a very sweet, touching little movie about death and about life and about a lot of big weighty things, which are frankly themes that Tim Burton's usually not concerned with, even though we say that as big fans of him. And again, a lot of movies that are, I think, even a good amount better works than even, say, Big Fish are less mature even than that movie is. And so that in of itself reflects a little bit of an important inflection point in Burton's own career, even though it turned out to not nearly be as influential or as much of a game changer and a new direction for him in the way that Spielberg's movies became more mature as he got older. What's Tim Burton doing now? He's doing the Wednesday Addams show, which we talked about. And since, we've kind of been talking about in the background of this show the last few weeks and months, haven't even watched it yet. That's been a big hit, I know, on Netflix. I don't know about you. I've heard a lot of kids at school
talking the kids
about
love
that.
It, because I had to, it's kind of funny you mention this. Last few days, I've showed the kids Batman and Batman Returns, and I'm like, yeah, this is Tim Burton made this. And they're like, oh, the guy that did Wednesday? I'm like, yeah, the guy that did Wednesday. It's just like, but, yeah, this is funny to me. But it's just so strange, because it's like, these movies, his movies were literally gospel to us, and it's like, oh, this thing? Oh, Wednesday, right? It's like, Dark Shadows. I remember seeing that. It's like, yeah. But anyway,
so the reason we paired both of these movies together, because it's probably you're thinking, well, this is kind of an odd pairing. I think one of the more discreet pairings yet, frankly. I think of New Year's and New Beginnings weirdly with both of these. The Marx Brothers in the most subjective way, because the very first Marx Brother movie I saw, I remember, was Horse Feathers, New Year's Eve, 2011, going into 2011, which is the year I graduated high school. So that was everything about those years are very important to me in a lot of ways. And these movies, or the Marx Brothers movies, usually get shown right around New Year's on TCM, and so I, in my head, naturally associate them with New Year's a little bit. Also, their movies are about parties, planned and otherwise, in some roundabout way, and so I think of New Year's when I think of the Marx Brothers. I associate those things in that way together. And so very likely, again, and the funniest thing about seeing Horse Feathers, which is still one of my very favorites from them, it's not necessarily the best, but it's still solid, it holds up, is that it opens with that whole graduation speech, which, again, I'm thinking about my graduation was going to happen some months later, and how he just eviscerates everybody in the room, like the faculty, the staff, the students, just everybody. He just totally lays waste to everybody. Groucho.
Before I speak, I have something to say.
Which is one of my favorite quotes. I say that all the time. And so I just associate that with New Year's. And then Big Fish is just a very naturally, we're at the end of one life and looking ahead. And I think it's a very natural, reflective New Year's movie in that way.
Maybe next week we can talk some about the Spalding Gray, that he literally, I think, committed suicide like the morning after he saw that big fish.
I forgot about that.
He was like a big fan. He like really loved it, and it really touched him, and that was what led him to suicide in a weird way. I don't know.
I think
but
he had suicide.
That was like a
before,
long-standing thing, but it's a weird way to talk about that. But but yeah, I don't remember that whole story. But yeah,
well,
I'll have more to think about that.
What little
when I see
bit
the
we've
movie.
seen of his lectures and talks, that seems like something he would like because he's a very reflective person.
Right.
So again, that's Big Fish and Duck Soup coming up next episode. This episode is the very last episode that will be coming out in 2022. Any general thoughts or reflections, Levi, about this year, either for this podcast or for you personally or for the movies generally?
Well, I like that we're doing this new format.
I agree.
I just like to change things up. We're entering our third year of doing this, so we've taken breaks here and there. We're probably going to be taking a break after the next one. I'll go ahead and say for a little while.
I don't think we'll be hitting episode 100 in this year coming up. Probably the next though. I don't know. There's a chance we could.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Could be. But yeah, it's just been a really busy year for me because I was the end of my first full year of teaching and then the beginning of my second, and so it's just been a lot going on. But movie-wise, as far as the new movies that have come out, it's been a good year. And I think we've done a lot of good movies on the podcast too. So
it's been a busy year for me as well.
I'd have to look at a list of everything that's even on there. I know we took a pretty long break after we did Titanic, and then we did the crime movies. So yeah, that took up most of the year, or the crime movies, I guess.
Well, we had Vim Vendors on the pod.
Oh yeah,
that was a big moment for us.
Right.
Yeah. He even ever so gently and ever so briefly cameoed last week to offer up his thoughts on the Sight and Sound.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So
he was barely here.
Yeah.
In fact, it was kind of weird that he even came in at all, but
yeah.
I don't know.
So we're grateful to have Vim on the show. Vim, if you're out there listening, we love you. We appreciate it. Hopefully you can come on some more in the future. Yeah, send us a check, please. Again, to reiterate what you said, I really like that we've transitioned in the double feature category. It allows us to talk about more movies and keeps the podcast from being stale, I think, in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And again, we went back to doing a commentary for Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, so we'll very likely at some point return and do more commentaries. But yeah, it's been a bit of a mixed bag of a year for me personally, but one that I'm nonetheless grateful to be on the other side of, and I can't wait to see what 2023 awaits us there. So this is Kyle.
This is Levi.
Take care. God bless.
Rest in peace, James Buchanan.
Thank you very much. So nice. Goodbye.